Chapter 999. Rinpoche pushed aside some matters and took 2 days to go to the laboratory. He also brought along the little princess, Erhua. Normally, parents in the city would want to take their children to the suburbs. Although the palace wasn't small, it was still too small for this world. Rinpoche also hoped that she could see more things. Just like ordinary parents, they had a lot in common when it came to treating their children. Erhua wasn't as excited and eager as she was when she first left the palace. Although the boundless plains and fields made people feel free, in the eyes of this little fellow, there was nothing new and interesting. Occasionally, when Rinpoche wasn't paying attention, she would grab some strange things and stuff them into her mouth. For example, bugs on grass stalks, for example, a three-eyed toad, for example, a butterfly the size of a palm that was flying, for example, a bug that looked like a beetle on a tree. His chubby little palm pressed up and grabbed, and with a flip of his hand, he threw it directly into his mouth. Her eyes narrowed. Rinpoche could feel the happiness in her expression. This happiness lasted until they entered the mountain. This mountain was originally called Mount Natu, and the meaning of the name was obvious. It was very simple and straightforward. Rinpoche waved his hand and changed it to Mount Zhongshu, which was actually Mount End. After all, everything in this world would start from here. From the name, one could see Rinpoche's expectations for the laboratory here. The laboratory was halfway up the mountain, and there were soldiers guarding the foot of the mountain. A cement road went straight to the mountainside, and at the top, the winged cavalry were the guards. Besides the lack of Cardinal Heaven experts, the security here was second only to that of the palace. Coupled with the few spirit wheel sword masters in the laboratory, the security here wasn't much weaker than that of the palace except for the Empress. When Rinpoche arrived at the mountainside and got off his mount, Erhua cried out and jumped into the forest the moment he turned around. "Find her and bring her back," Rinpoche ordered the guard around him. Now that the murderers on the mountain had almost been eliminated, it was rare to even see a man-wheel expert. With Erhua's skills, she naturally wouldn't be in any danger. However, as soon as he entered the laboratory, he heard a cry from afar. Rinpoche scuttled out of the courtyard. In less than a minute, he saw Zhu Hua returning with Erhua in her arms. Erhua's eyes were filled with tears. He was crying with snot and tears, and he kept spitting out saliva. She ate the stinky turtle. Zhu Hua had a gloating look on his face. Who told her to bite his chest? Who wasn't a young girl? Rinpoche, stinky turtle was a type of insect the size of 2 finger joints. When it encountered an enemy, it would release a strong, irritating liquid. This kind of fighting method was very common, and there were many such species on Earth, such as the 9-fragrance bug, the stink bug. However, the bugs in this world were especially smelly, and the smell was especially disgusting. Of course, it was nothing compared to a skunk bomb. Even so, Two Flower had suffered quite a bit this time. Rinpoche felt that this was an opportunity to get rid of her habit of eating random things. He smiled and carried Honeysuckle over. A second later, he stuffed Honeysuckle back into Zhu Hua's arms. It was too smelly. After suffering such a big loss, Erhua finally behaved for a while. She curled up in Zhu Hua's arms and sobbed. The lingering smell wouldn't disappear for a while, and it was enough for her to remember. When Rinpoche arrived at the laboratory, he first looked at the simple milling machine. The gears, lead screw, and knife holder were all exposed. It was powered by hand, but could be easily changed to electricity. There was also a row of various milling cutters at the side. This milling machine was mainly used to process screws, twist drills, and other parts with grooves. Although it was simple, it had an extraordinary significance. 0.3 millimeters. This was a level of precision that could only be achieved by an old craftsman who had been immersed in forging for decades. However, at this moment, only this machine was needed. Any apprentice could operate it, and the speed was several times faster than those old craftsmen. With this machine, it meant that the manufacturing of precision equipment in this world had moved from small workshops to industrial mass production. Well done. Rinpoche stroked the simple machine in front of him. He couldn't hide the happiness on his face, and he wasn't stingy with his praise. "Thank you, Your Highness." The person who spoke was Ling Du, one of the spirit wheel sword masters and one of the first two to come to Lan City. Don't thank me. I should be the one thanking you. Your names will be remembered in history. Rin Baqin smiled. If possible, we can exchange this honor for something else. Ling Du said bluntly. What do you want? Rin Baqin turned to look at him and the other spirit wheel sword masters. These people were treasures, real treasures. They were even more valuable than those top experts. There were many experts in this world, but there weren't many such treasures. Brothel. The youngest, Du Mengyang, was interrupted before he could finish speaking. Cough, cough. A violent cough interrupted him. An old man glared at him and said, vulgar. The old man was called Jinyao. He turned and smiled at Rinpoche. It would be best if there was a Zhang Tai. Rinpoche thought about the word Zhang Tai and realized that it seemed to be another name for a brothel like a brothel. This term existed on Earth as well. According to the records of the Han Dynasty, there was a street in ancient Chang and called Zhang Tai. There were many brothels on the street, and the term Zhang Tai originated from this street. It wasn't surprising that there was such a term in this world. However, Rinpoche was still a little surprised that there was actually a term called Zhang Tai. He just didn't know if it meant what he thought it meant. Brothel? Rinpoche asked. Jun Yong replied calmly. A high-end, grand, and classy brothel. It's not a place like a brothel. Children are ignorant. Rinpoche was surprised. This requirement wasn't low. To build a brothel in such a remote place? To specifically serve them? As if reading Rinpoche's mind, Zhun Yong said bluntly, we want a prosperous world, not this desolate place. What's the difference between this and my previous life? Rinpoche thought for a while and asked, do you want to get married? Zhun Yong rolled his eyes and replied, not interested. Actually, I'm still interested. Du Mingyang muttered, what do you know? How can a domestic flower be better than a wild flower? Zhun Yong turned his head and scolded. You have to have a domestic flower first. Du Mingyang was obviously unconvinced. Rinpoche thought about it and agreed. All right, I agree. At most, he would move to a brothel from the Yun Nation. Your Highness is very loyal. Jin Yong was overjoyed and gave a thumbs up. Rinpoche smiled and changed the topic to the milling machine that they were currently making. How is it? Can you make a 0.1 mm precision milling machine? It will take some effort, and it will be scrapped if you're not careful. Zhun Yong said frankly. However, it can still be made with some time. When I see a brothel, I will definitely let you see a 0.1 mm precision milling machine. That's not enough. A 0.1 mm precision milling machine can't meet my requirements, Rinpoche said with a smile. Zhun Yong furrowed his eyebrows, frowned, and thought for a moment before gritting his teeth and saying, 0.07 mm. Precision is the most I can achieve without relying on other tools. Rinpoche laughed when he heard this. These people still had room to exploit. In fact, machines with a 0.01 mm precision could be found everywhere on Earth. They could only be considered street goods, and it was very easy for him to bring them over. However, technology would progress little by little. Otherwise, it would be a castle in the air. Being able to achieve this in such a short time, in such a simple environment, was enough to satisfy Rinpoche. These people were really treasures. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 1000. Rinpoche came to the laboratory not only to look at the machine tools, but also to obtain a thick stack of data. This included standard atmospheric pressure, gravity, elemental table, air composition, soil composition, and so on. This was the basis of the development of science and technology in this world. For these things, 3 experts went to the Yun Nation under the protection of the winged cavalry warriors. Not to mention the novelty of what they saw and heard along the way, this data would at least allow Rinpoche to modify some of the teaching materials at the academy. For example, the atmospheric pressure in this world was 1 times that of Earth. However, Rinpoche had done experiments at the academy and found that the boiling point of water was about 106 degrees Celsius, which meant that Lan City was more than 1,000 meters above sea level. At the same time, the gravity in this world was slightly higher than that of Earth. These experts felt more tired when they first came to this world than on Earth. According to their observations and some speculations, the planet in this world was larger than Earth, rotated faster than Earth, and was further away from the star than from Earth to the Sun. As for the specific data, it would take a long time to come up with it. The air in this world was composed of only 72% nitrogen and 25% oxygen. There was one more rare gas than on Earth, which made up a total of 4%. The biggest difference between this world and Earth was that there was an important gas in the air that made up more than 5%. This gas was very active at high temperatures and could easily react with a variety of elements. Rinpoche stayed at Zhongshan for a night and approved 2 batches of experts' applications to expand his sampling area. The next day, he returned to Lan City with a thick stack of data. With these people, he had a lot less to worry about. As expected, professional matters should be left to the professionals to handle. After returning to Lan City, Rinpoche stopped for a while on Jingyang Street. There were 3 gates and 4 roads in Lan City. The intersection of the 4 roads was in the middle, which was also the most prosperous area in the entire city. A little south of this intersection, there was a 3-story brick building that was much taller than the other 2-story buildings. The bricks were decorated with large pieces of white jade. White jade was still stone, but its color was similar to white jade. It was a mineral deposit that had been discovered during a recent mine exploration and was more valuable as a decoration than its original material. This small building was 6 storefronts wide, and with the white jade decorations, it looked quite luxurious. It could be said that in the eyes of most people, the most luxurious building in Lan City was this newly built shop with the word silver hanging on its door. At this time, there were many people outside the bank. People entered and came out one after another, holding a few pieces of paper in their hands. Their expressions were slightly uneasy. "Boss, can this thing really be spent?" One of the men leaned on the shoulder of the other man and waved the piece of paper in his hand. "It should be possible, right?" The burly man who was being held down had a face full of doubt. "His Majesty wouldn't lie to us. I still owe the restaurant a tale of silver. I don't know if they'll accept this." The other man's face was also somewhat gloomy. These were all people from the Public Order Bureau. If they were like this, then there was no need to mention ordinary people. He was used to using silver and copper, so when he suddenly received this kind of new paper, he felt that it was unreliable. "Didn't you see the notice? This thing can be exchanged for silver and copper here." Another burly man said from the side, "Nonsense, I want to see it, but the problem is that I don't understand it. They recognize me, but I don't recognize them. Isn't this superfluous? Wouldn't it be better to just give them silver?" Someone muttered. Rinpoche watched quietly from afar. That's right, it was indeed superfluous at the moment. After all, these banknotes weren't recognized by the people outside. Regardless of whether they were used to buy things or do other things, they had to be exchanged for silver first. However, this was, after all, a beginning. When these people got used to using these banknotes to exchange for silver and copper, and when the people started to get used to it, these banknotes could be directly used for exchange in the market. Rinpoche had a series of plans to use these banknotes to promote them. His goal was to allow banknotes to be used in most places in Dayo within 3 years. "This is Her Majesty, right?" Someone sitting on a horse said to the people around him while distinguishing the patterns on the banknotes. They were by Shuriying, the head of the Public Order Bureau, and Tai Yin, the head of the Department of Supervision. Their salaries weren't even 100 taels of silver, and they were probably here to watch the show. They had changed the banknote from the largest to the smallest denominations. "It must be. Her Majesty is actually drawn on this. Who is this? Zhao Prince Consort. Look at the sun. Zhao Prince Consort is beside Her Majesty's banknote. Her Majesty is beside Zhao Prince Consort's banknote. The 2 of them are even looking at each other. Why do I feel like I've been fed something? I'm suddenly in a bad mood." After the 2 of them finished speaking, they turned around and saw Rinpoche smiling brightly. "Zhao Prince Consort is here. You and Her Majesty. What did you say?" Taiyin turned to look at Bai Shiying. Bai Shiying frowned, pondered, and suddenly realized something. Like chewing wax. Is this how it is? It should be, Rinpoche said playfully. Her Majesty will definitely be happy to hear that. Of course. Bai Shiying laughed heartily. I've even studied a few books. They're all in the stomach of a dog, Rinpoche cursed. The three of them exchanged some pleasantries and left in a hurry, saying that they were going to the brothel to take a look at something for their little babies. Rinpoche turned around and returned to the palace. These banknotes were denominated in silver. The largest denomination was 100 taels of silver, which was equivalent to 100 taels of silver. Below that, there were 50 taels of silver, 20 taels of silver, 10 taels of silver, 5 taels of silver, 1 tael of silver. The lowest was up to 1 centimeter of silver, which was equivalent to 1. 2-1. Embossed printing and watermarking were used to prevent counterfeiting. Cotton and 2 other plants were added to the banknotes and mixed in a certain proportion to make the banknotes harder. With these techniques, it would be difficult to imitate them for at least 20 years. In addition, there was a warning on the banknotes that said, counterfeiters will be punished with capital punishment. On the 100 taels of silver note was the portrait of the Empress. She was looking sideways at the only blank spot on the banknote. In the blank spot was his Mercury, which was looking at the Empress. The 50 taels of silver and 100 taels of silver were polar opposites. On the 20 taels of silver note was a map of Dayo, including the current Yun nation. On the 10 taels of silver were the Aboriginals, the Jing tribe, and the people of the Yun nation. On the 5 taels of silver were the armies. On the 1 tael of silver was the train. The Empress was sitting in the palace and watching a TV series. She hadn't gotten tired of watching it for so many years. She sighed when she heard the whimpering sounds coming from outside. She was back after 2 days of peace. Your Majesty. Rinpoche left Lu Hua outside. After entering the hall, he hugged the Empress and casually complained, when I came back just now, I saw the officers from the Public Order Bureau and the Inspection Bureau. According to them, we were like chewing wax. The Empress thought for a while before she understood what he meant. Her face turned cold as she said, they are itching for a beating again. They even dare to make up gossip about me. Rinpoche agreed and said, I think so too. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 1001. Brother, sister-in-law, you are back. Wanyan opened the door and laughed at Rinpoche and the Empress. Although Rinpoche rarely saw him nowadays, they had a good relationship. Rinpoche felt that this was probably because he always beat him up when he was young. Yuqing, call me uncle. Rinpoche patted Chi Yuqing's head and laughed. Erhua looked at Rinpoche, thought for a while, and pointed to herself. Father. The smile on Rinpoche's face froze. Rinpoche stretched out his claws, grabbed Erhua's face, and twisted it. What do you want to call me? Erhua looked reluctant. With tears in her eyes, she called out in a childish voice, Uncle. Rinpoche laughed. Brother, why bother with a child? A child's words carry no harm. Rinpoche smiled and shook his head. It took him half a year to correct Erhua's belief that she should call him father. However, he didn't change her habit of letting others call her father. In fact, although Erhua was only 1 year old, she was already 1 meters tall, and her intelligence was comparable to that of a 3 or 4-year-old child. However, Rinpoche found that this child was extremely stubborn. It took him half a year to correct her belief that she should call herself father and her habit of letting others call her father. At this time, Erhua was wearing a set of white clothes that imitated the Empress's style, covered with indigo muslin, and tied her hair in a ponytail. She looked refreshing and delicate, and her face was lovable. This set of clothes was able to slightly conceal her sinewy muscles. However, she still looked a lot bigger than an ordinary child. A year had passed, but her muscles hadn't decreased at all. This made Rinpoche feel a little sad. The sweet little jacket in his heart had now become a Gundam. When he entered the door, his parents were there, as well as Ren Wanyan's wife and son, a boy about 10 years old. He looked delicate and obedient, and his name was Xia. This is brother. Rinpoche pointed to the boy. Erhua stubbornly pointed to herself. Father. She quickly corrected herself under Rinpoche's finger. Brother. Xia happily came over to look at this sudden addition of a younger sister. Go and play with Big Brother. You're not allowed to push Big Brother, bump into Big Brother, or hit Big Brother. Rinpoche repeated the 3 danties again and put the little fellow aside. Let me show you something good. Xia acted like an older brother and called Honeysuckle over to look at his treasure. It was a game console that projected itself in the air. Honeysuckle looked at the little person running in the air with a face full of curiosity. After thinking for a moment, he firmly opened his mouth, revealing his eerie white teeth, but he bit down on nothing, so he immediately felt wronged. Xia was amused by Honeysuckle's reaction. That's fake. It's a projection. He even introduced his favorite console, the PS666, to Honeysuckle. Of course, he emphasized on games. Honeysuckle obviously didn't listen to those words. He stared at the game console with interest for a while, then poked it with his finger to make sure it was real. Then he revealed his white teeth. Rinpoche had just sat down for 3 minutes when he saw Xia running over in a panic and complaining, "She ate my game console." "Did you eat it?" Rinwanyan looked at him and found it funny. "Then let her eat it." Obviously, there was a serious discrepancy between what he thought and the reality. Rinpoche slapped his forehead and disappeared from the sofa. Honeysuckle was sitting on the floor and chewing happily. Chips, metal shells, and other fragments kept popping out of his mouth. All that was left on the floor were these scraps. The Empress was 1 step ahead of Rinpoche. When Rinpoche arrived, she already picked up Honeysuckle and slapped his but a few times. Rinpoche thought for a while and decided to appease the Empress before letting Honeysuckle spit out those things. Fortunately, it was the game console that I bit and not Xia. The Empress's hand paused for a moment. Then she slapped him even harder. Meanwhile, Rinwanyan's face changed color. For the rest of the day, Honeysuckle sat beside the Empress. However, it was as if there were nails under his butt and he couldn't sit steadily. His body swayed left and right, and his eyeballs kept rolling. Even if his butt wasn't swollen, she still couldn't sit steadily. Honeysuckle was astonishingly full of energy and curiosity. He was curious about everything around him almost all the time. The others looked at Honeysuckle in surprise. After all, a child who could eat a game console in a few mouthfuls was amazing enough. The family gathering ended just like that, and Honeysuckle left a deep impression on everyone. Compared to the scene of sweeping away everything they heard, this family gathering gave everyone a more direct understanding of this little fellow. After that auction, Rinpoche sold 2 more batches of tractors, totaling 3,000 tractors. Among them, 1,000 were given to the Aboriginals. Similarly, after that auction, the Aboriginals' enthusiasm for tractors finally exploded. Although tractors weren't cost-effective in agriculture, they had irreplaceable value in long-distance transportation. Of course, the long-distance transportation company that Rinpoche set up played an important role in this. This was also the prototype of logistics. The Jing tribe was responsible for lobbying merchants in the Yun Nation to transport goods to Lan City through the transportation company. This saved them the trouble of setting up their own caravans, and it also allowed merchants who weren't strong enough to transport goods between the 2 places, invigorating the market. Since Rinpoche applied many of the mature rules and regulations of the logistics company from the very beginning, the long-distance transportation company, which appeared to be quite formal from the beginning, gained the recognition of a large number of small and medium-sized merchants in a very short period of time, and a steady stream of transportation orders followed. Not only did they transport goods, but they also transported people. Although it wasn't very comfortable, comfort wasn't the most important thing for those small and medium-sized merchants. With a sufficient market, the transportation company would naturally develop and grow in a short period of time. Having a tractor was a ticket to enter the long-distance transportation company. It could be said that Rinpoche had put in a lot of effort for the Aboriginals. He had used all kinds of methods. However, he could also understand that these reckless and straightforward people took a long time to accept new things. After this new initiative was announced, at first, only the various families and a small number of Aboriginals participated with the mentality of trying it out. After the first batch of people saw the sweetness, more Aboriginal people finally became enthusiastic. In just a few months, this long-distance transportation company had set up a fleet of nearly 1,000 tractors to transport goods between the two places. Including the families and big merchants from the Yun Nation, there were thousands of tractors traveling on this national highway every day. What followed were all kinds of traffic accidents. For example, people used their feet to hold the tractor's nose firmly in place and swung it to hit people. Some people used the tractor to drift. Some people carried the tractor to forcibly overtake other cars. There were also 2 tractors traveling side by side and fighting while driving. The most amazing thing was that 4 people carried 2 tractors and kicked each other while running wildly. Due to the collision, the 2 tractors couldn't move, which resulted in such a scene. All these situations were an eye-opener for Rinpoche. It had to be said that every world had its own way of playing. After accepting the new concept of tractors, the Aboriginals also burst out with amazing creativity, and a large number of magical old drivers from another world emerged. The tractor, coupled with their strong individual strength, made them look like they were racing cart riders. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 1002. There is an endless stream of tractors, carriages, and pedestrians on the official road from Lawn City to the Yun Nation. Ever since the construction of this road, it had brought abundant vitality to these 2 areas. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to call this road the main artery of Dayo, the giant. At this time, a group of 100 cavalrymen was rushing on the wide road, passing by a tractor carrying a lot of goods from time to time. This new type of transportation had gradually replaced the previous ox carts and carriages. This trend was getting faster and faster. Although the cement road was flat, it required a lot of animal power. The people here didn't understand the role of animal power, but they understood that it was because the road was too hard. The horses needed to rest after a few trips on the cement road. Every 100 kilometers along this road, there was a so-called relay station where people could rest, eat, sell biodiesel, and inspect and repair tractors. This made everyone feel convenient and at ease. The sky was getting dark, and the 100 cavalrymen stopped in front of a relay station. The relay station was located at the side of the road. It had been expanded into an area of several thousand square meters, and there was a row of 2-story brick buildings. Just like the new buildings in Lawn City, they had a completely different style from the previous buildings. The walls were made of red bricks, and they were covered with plants that looked quite exquisite. The tempting aroma of food was coming from a small building near the edge. "Stop! Get off your mounts and rest." Following the leader's order, the cavalrymen stopped one after another, jumped off their mounts, and tied them to the animal pen at the side. The 100 jumping goats only took up 1/3 of the space. Everyone entered the relay station and saw a row of electric lights hanging above the lobby. Like the street lights in Lawn City, they didn't require grease or other combustibles, and there was no choking smoke. They were clean and bright. The hall was very big, and there were dozens of wooden tables. Most of them were occupied. The Aboriginal tractor drivers, who were dressed in animal skins, the Yun Nation merchants, who were dressed in silks, the solemn-looking guards, and the low-profile Jing tribe people, who were sitting in the corner, were all sitting in the hall. Occasionally, the sweet voices of girls could be heard. The entrance of the 100 cavalrymen attracted a lot of attention, but they looked away after seeing their attire. The words Dukkha were written on their clothes, and the saber at their waist was the standard long saber of the winged cavalry. It was 3 times longer and 1 times wider than the saber of the ordinary Aboriginal army. Rinpoche did not know what new department this was. New departments often appeared in Dayo, such as the Department of Commerce, the newly established Department of Transportation, and the Department of Price. Although they didn't know which department they were from, Everyone could tell that these people were from the winged cavalry. When traveling outside, one's eyes had to be sharp. These merchants who traveled this road all year round knew this principle very well. The one in front was a woman with a scorpion tattoo on her cheek. Nearly 100 burly men were also brimming with murderous auras. When they looked at people, their gazes seemed to be filled with provocation and ridicule. The 100 people sat at 10 tables, ordered roasted meat, vegetable broth, roasted potatoes, and wine, and began to eat in silence. However, he also paid attention to his surroundings while eating. Soon, the few of them stopped eating and looked to the side. A man dressed in embroidered clothes walked towards them. "May I ask if this is Lieutenant Hua?" The man cupped his fists at the leading lady and smiled. "Who are you?" Hua Qinghua raised her head and glanced at him. "Last time at the bank, I was saved by military officer Hua. Unfortunately, I didn't have the chance to meet him after that. Since we've met by chance today, I wonder if I can invite Captain Hua to have a drink with everyone? This is just a small token of my appreciation. Are you done?" Hua Qinghua looked at the roasted meat in front of her without batting an eyelid. I'm done. You're delaying my meal." Hua Qinghua's meaning was obvious. "You're a hindrance, so get lost." The middle-aged man didn't look too surprised. Although he felt a little awkward, he still maintained his gentlemanly manner and cupped his fists at Hua Qinghua. "In that case, I shall take my leave. Thank you, military officer Hua, for the previous matter." Hua Qinghua didn't say anything and continued to serve the roasted meat in front of her. The middle-aged man returned to his seat and laughed self-deprecatingly. "You must have suffered a setback." The man sitting at the same table with him was a wealthy merchant of similar age. As expected, the middle-aged man replied, "Aboriginals are all rocks, the kind that can't be moved." The wealthy merchant laughed softly. The middle-aged man agreed with him. However, he was still a little concerned about the Imperial Inspector uniform that Hua Qinghua and the others were wearing. Previously, when Hua Qinghua and the others arrived, everyone heard the sound of hooves and knew that they were heading toward the Yun Nation. They didn't know what to do. This incident was just a small interlude. Hua Qinghua and the others rested at the relay station for a night before continuing their journey. 2 days later, everyone arrived at Pingdu. First, they obtained some information from the rearguard commandery, rested for a night, inquired about some matters, and then headed straight for the protectorate of Yun Nation. After some time, Hua Qinghua finally saw Zidonglai. Zidonglai was a handsome man who looked to be in his 30s. His face looked as if it had been carved by a knife or an axe. It was angular, and his eyes were full of spirit. If one were to say that Zidonglai was the most handsome man of the Aboriginals, there wouldn't be many people who would object. Even Hua Qinghua was momentarily dazed when she saw Zidonglai. "Imperial Inspector? Never heard of it. Why are you here?" Zidonglai sat at the seat of honor and asked faintly. Hua Qinghua became serious and took out an imperial edict. The gist of it was that the Imperial Inspector was responsible for investigating the conflicts and contradictions between the Aboriginals and the Yun Nation people in the Yun Nation, as well as investigating the harassment of the civilians by the soldiers of the Protectorate of the Northeast. Zidonglai's eyes flickered and turned a little colder. "Is this the intention of Her Majesty or Zhao, Prince Consort? Since it was personally written by Her Majesty, it naturally has her intention." Hua Qinghua flipped the imperial edict over and showed it to Zidonglai. "The Yun Nation is newly settled, and there are many revolts among the civilians," Zidonglai said with a cold face. In fact, Zidonglai always had a cold face. It's one thing to rebel, but it's another thing for the soldiers of the Protectorate of Yun Nation to harass the civilians. Hua Qinghua took out another piece of paper from her waist and said, "On the 11th of September, Commandant Tai Fonbao beat up a local merchant, Li Jingwen, after drinking in a brothel, seriously injuring him. On the 19th of September, Commandant Qin Huya soldiers collided with someone on the road and started a fight with the local people. Huang Chu, Shen Du, and 13 other people were seriously injured. On the 6th of October, Commandant Su Sanhua and his soldiers beat up 4 scholars, Yuan Qing, Lu Dong, and 2 others in a restaurant. After that, Their names were left behind and had a bad influence. 11th of October. Enough. You're well prepared. They're all my soldiers. What are you going to do about it, Imperial Inspector? Zidonglai waved his hand and interrupted Hua Qinghua. In the past 3 months, there have been 13 cases of harassment of civilians in Pingdu alone. There are even more cases in the entire Yun nation. According to Her Majesty's order, these people must be punished according to military law. Moreover, they must be punished in an eye-catching place in the city to serve as a warning to others. They should be punished according to military law. Even if it's an order from Her Majesty, I won't accept it. Zidonglai stood up after finishing his sentence. All of you may leave. Protector Z, are you going to defy the order? Hua Qinghua moved in front of Zidonglai in a flash. How dare you? The guards in the tent were furious. You dare to stop me? Zidonglai looked at Hua Qinghua with a dangerous coldness in his eyes. Protector Z, the order is from Her Majesty. I, the Imperial Inspector, have the duty to investigate such matters. Hua Qinghua blocked his way without backing down. If you defy the order, Her Majesty will definitely be furious. I, Zidonglai, and the soldiers of the Protectorate have made great contributions to the Yun nation. Even if I have some flaws, I can't be punished in public. I refuse to accept Her Majesty's order. You can go back and report to Her Majesty. If Her Majesty wants to punish me, I'm willing to accept it. Hua Qinghua saw that Zidonglai had made up his mind and gritted her teeth. She had just arrived, but Protector Z had already refused to accept the order. This job was indeed difficult. Just as she was feeling angry, she felt a strong force pushing her away. Zidonglai waved his hand in the air, causing her to retreat several steps. By the time Hua Qinghua came back to her senses, Zidonglai had already left the tent. Hua Qinghua quickly chased after him. Stop! Zidonglai's guards stopped Hua Qinghua. I have Her Majesty's order, so I can move freely. Who can stop me? Hua Qinghua sneered and took out the order from her pocket. The guard's morale immediately stagnated. Zidonglai glanced at her, snorted coldly, and left without bothering with her. However, he didn't expect Hua Qinghua to follow him blindly. Whether he was eating or sleeping, Hua Qinghua would definitely appear by his side and read out the Empress's orders from time to time. If it were someone else, Zidonglai would have killed them with a slap. However, Hua Qinghua had the Empress's order. After a period of time, Zidonglai was quite annoyed. He couldn't beat her up or chase her away, so he simply instructed the guard to curse at Hua Qinghua and force her to retreat. He didn't expect Hua Qinghua to curse so badly that the guards couldn't open their mouths. However, Zidonglai couldn't do as the imperial edict said and let the soldiers receive military law in the streets and be surrounded by the people of the Yun nation. This was the stubbornness of a general. No matter what they had done, they were still his soldiers. How could he allow them to be humiliated in front of others? The two sides continued to be in a deadlock. When Rinpoche received the news, he felt rather helpless. Hua Qinghua's dogskin plaster tactic was suggested by him. After all, Zidonglai was extremely famous and had made great contributions. Even the Empress wouldn't easily touch him. However, if these matters weren't dealt with, the people of the Yun nation would always be hostile to the Aboriginals. In order to absorb a nation as a part of Dayo, a combination of strength and gentleness had to be used. Rewards and punishments had to be fair. Zidonglai had no choice but to make such a move. Now he just had to wait and see how long Zidonglai could endure. Rinpoche put this aside and waited for Zidonglai's reaction. He still had too many things to do and couldn't put too much energy into this. A year had passed, and the two were still in a deadlock. Hua Qinghua moved directly to the Protectorate and was like Zidonglai's shadow every day. Even Zidonglai's guards and the generals from the Protectorate were used to her presence. Hua Qinghua never forgot her duties. Almost every day, she would read the Empress's orders to Zidonglai. At the same time, she would also get her subordinates to bring news of the harassment of the people by the Protectorate soldiers. Perhaps it was due to her efforts, but such incidents seemed to have decreased in the past 6 months. 2 years had passed, and Rinpoche sometimes almost forgot about this matter. Today, he had just finished looking at the phone sample that had just been produced and asked about Hua Qinghua's current situation. He didn't expect Zi Donglai to be able to hold on for so long, which made Rinpoche feel rather helpless. Your Highness, I just received news that Protector General Zi is going to marry Hua Duke in 3 months. Rinpoche was confused. Rinpoche's expression suddenly became extremely interesting. He felt depressed and didn't know what to say. That feeling was as if he had been F***ed. Chapter 1003. Although it had been 2 years, only 1 year and 7 months had actually passed. Logically speaking, Rinpoche should be happy about Zi Donglai's wedding. He didn't have much of a relationship with Zi Donglai. However, the descendants of such experts wouldn't be too talented. For example, Hong Wu's granddaughter, Hong Xian, had officially broken through to the Cardinal Heaven level 2 months ago. A 28-year-old Cardinal Heaven expert was considered one of the most talented among the Aboriginals. Every talented newcomer would be the foundation for the future fight against the foreign races. Rinpoche had always regarded the foreign races as his goal, so he should be happy to know about Zi Donglai's wedding. However, he felt like he had been F***ed. In his heart, he naturally felt like he was hitting a dog with a meat bun and it would never come back. He had carefully selected Hua Qinghua and sent her to the Yun Nation. He had lobbied the Empress to set up the Bureau of Investigation, thought up a plan for her, and asked for the warrant from the Empress. However, Zi Donglai had been holding back for less than 2 years and had eaten the meat bun. This made Rinpoche want to curse, but he didn't know how to say it. Give me all the information related to the Bureau of Investigation for the past 2 years. Rinpoche sighed softly. He took a stack of information back to the palace and spent 2 hours sorting out the situation over the past 1.5 years. Although the meat bun couldn't be returned, it wasn't without gains during this period. At the very least, the soldiers from the Protectorate of the Northeast harassed and beat up the people of the Yun Nation by about 70%. This became more and more obvious in recent times. Whether it was because Zi Donglai was annoyed by her pestering, or because the generals from the Protectorate of the Northeast were flirting with Zi Donglai, there were still some effects. This credit still belonged to Hua Qinghua. Rinpoche leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and pondered. Under the current situation, Hua Qinghua didn't need to be removed from her position, and it might be useful to keep her status as an inspector. Hua Qinghua wasn't willing to let Zi Donglai be her master and might even be able to suppress him. In any case, he still had the trump card of the rearguard commandery in his hands, and he could report the situation of the Yun Nation and the Bureau of Investigation at any time. Having made up his mind, Rinpoche opened his eyes and saw that the Empress had unknowingly returned. She was sitting there with her legs crossed and a wine glass in her hand, gently swirling it. Did Her Majesty go to the garden? Rinpoche laughed. She turned her head and said, "These days, the flowers in the garden aren't gorgeous. I heard that if 2 people are buried there, the flowers will bloom exceptionally brightly. Who provoked Your Majesty again?" Rinpoche went over and hugged the Empress. Then he took the wine cup from her hand and drank it in one gulp. "The Qin Nation has sent an envoy," the Empress said faintly. And then, "I don't like people who are too ugly. For the Qin Nation to send 2 people like this, I'm sure they're intentionally insulting me." The Empress immediately categorized the Qin Nation as being disrespectful to her. Rinpoche smiled. This was indeed the Empress's temperament. Other than her own people, she had always done as she pleased with outsiders. Even if it was Li Yuanzhu, she would be chased away without any hesitation. Not to mention the 2 envoys from the Qin state. "Do you want me to meet him?" "It's too late. Their heads are hanging at the top of the city wall now." The Empress supported her chin with one hand and played with the empty wine cup with the other. She put her finger into the cup and used the pad of her finger to rub the drops of liquid on the wall of the cup. "It's just that I haven't killed anyone in a long time, and it's not easy to find 2 corpses to bury in the garden. However, the 2 corpses have already been hung at the top of the city wall, and it doesn't seem appropriate to let someone pluck them and bury them in the garden. The Empress was conflicted about whether to bury the 2 corpses in the garden. Rinpoche thought about it and advised, Erhua likes to pick up random things to eat. The Empress finally gave up the idea of burying the 2 corpses in the garden after hearing this. The flowers in the garden aren't blooming well. Just fertilize them, Rinpoche added. The Empress, who had just given up on burying the corpses in the garden, immediately changed her mind and ordered someone take down the 2 corpses from the top of the city wall and bury them in the garden. Rinpoche took out another wine cup, poured himself some wine, and said to the Empress, Protector General Z is getting married in 3 months. The Empress was stunned. Why didn't I know? It has just been decided and will be reported to Your Majesty in another 2 days. Zidonglai has worked hard and performed a great service. I will take this opportunity to give him a big gift to show his honor. I need to prepare a gift as well. Rinpoche laughed. He was planning to give Zidonglai 100 adult magazines, a projector, and 10 action blockbusters. He wondered if Zidonglai could have a few more children. He always had a great plan in mind that was as great as the human restoration plan, the human reproduction plan. Where's Erhua? Rinpoche suddenly remembered that he had been back for more than 2 hours, but he didn't seem to hear Erhua shouting. For this energetic girl, this was rare. I didn't see her either, the Empress said faintly. Rinpoche called the guards to look for her, and Zhuhua rushed over shortly after. She was hiccuping all the way, and her face was flushed. Your Majesty, the little princess is missing. What did you do? The Empress looked at her coldly. Rinpoche smelled a faint sweet scent in the air after she came in. It was very familiar. It was the smell of the golden ring honey. Ever since he tasted it in the 60,000 mountains, Shiwanya would send a few jars as tribute every year. Consuming this honey was similar to taking DU, and it could make one feel like they were on cloud 9 and hallucinate. Did Erhua give you the honey? Rinpoche asked. Yes. It was quite delicious, and then I had a dream. Zhuhua scratched her head. She obviously hadn't recovered from the fact that she was knocked down by Erhua. Rinpoche rubbed his eyebrows. She was actually knocked down by a child who wasn't even 3 years old. With Zhuhua's intelligence, there was no value in saving her. Everyone search. We must find Yu Qing, the Empress ordered with a sullen face. Rinpoche got up, put his hands behind his back, and paced a few steps on the ground. Did Erhua eat the honey? Rinpoche looked up and asked. Zhuhua thought deeply and then looked at Rinpoche blankly. Obviously, she didn't pay attention to this question at all. Rinpoche sighed. Asking her was indeed a waste of time. He thought about it carefully. Although Erhua wasn't even 3 years old, her intelligence was equivalent to that of 7 or 8-year-old child. She must have made preparations to knock Zhuhua down. Since Erhua wasn't found, she probably didn't eat the golden ring honey. She definitely didn't go through all this trouble just to play in the palace. That lass might have run out of the house. As for how she ran out, he would only know after he caught her. Your Majesty, let's go out of the palace and have someone guard the city gates while you're at it. Search the city, Rinpoche said to the Empress. He wasn't too worried about Erhua's safety. One had to know that Erhua was at the advanced level of Kismet Heaven. Although she had no combat experience, she wasn't someone that ordinary people could bully. Moreover, with her strength, those who could defeat her would definitely know her identity. He wasn't worried about her safety. However, today, Erhua would probably have to face a mixed double. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 1004. 4 hours ago, below the Dayo Palace, there were many underground tunnels that looked like a spider's web. At this moment, a small figure was walking in the tunnels with her body bent. Even though it was pitch black, she didn't bump into the walls even once. Her long hair was tied into a ponytail. Her hair was originally 4 meters long, but after being accidentally tangled in a certain area, she finally endured the pain and cut it into ankle-length short hair. Honeysuckle's eyes seemed to emit some kind of light in the darkness. From time to time, She would identify the direction at the intersection or reach out to grab a bug from the soil at the side and throw it into her mouth. She would also listen to the sounds above her head and push away the soil above her to identify her position. After spending half an hour, Honeysuckle realized that there was no way forward. There was a huge rock blocking her way, and there was light coming from the edge of the rock. Wow! Honeysuckle cheered. She went forward and pushed the rock with her meaty little palm, creating a gap. Honeysuckle squeezed out of the gap and realized that this place was completely different from the places she had seen before. It was a courtyard surrounded by stone walls. There was a river, a rock garden, and many ice blocks piled there. A white bear was lying comfortably on top of the ice cubes. The moment it saw Honeysuckle, the bear raised its head, let out a roar, and revealed a mouth full of sharp teeth. Honeysuckle looked curiously at the white animal in front of her. In her memory, her father seemed to have brought her to see it before. Honeysuckle curiously moved closer and wanted to touch it. In her past experience, the furry thing she had touched included the roaring emperor Tion, Gun, and the golden retriever. All of them allowed her to pinch them. However, the white bear in front of her was obviously different from the one she had seen before. The tasty little fellow in front of it seemed to remind it of its days in the wild. It stood on its hind legs and let out a warning roar at Honeysuckle. Seeing that Honeysuckle approached it fearlessly and tried to seize its territory, the enraged white bear raised its huge paw and swung it at the little fellow. Honeysuckle, who had encountered such a situation for the first time, was at a loss. Her small figure in front of the huge white bear felt like she was facing a giant in a fairy tale. She allowed the huge bear's paw to reach her side before she hurriedly threw a punch as if she had just woken up from a dream. Crack! The front limbs of the white bear were twisted into strange shapes, and the white bear let out a mournful roar. The fear of being slapped by a woman in red all those years ago resurfaced in his mind. The white bear shuddered and gave up its precious land, the ice mountain, and curled its body into a ball. Honeysuckle, who had just been startled, was a little annoyed. Looking at the white bear that had curled up into a ball, he wanted to bully it, but he couldn't bear to do so. He thought about how he wouldn't be out for too long this time, and how excited he was about the outside world, so he suppressed the thought of bullying the bear. With a tap of his toes, he jumped over the wall. He wandered aimlessly around the beast park. He couldn't tell where he was going and had to hide whenever he saw someone. A few children were playing not far away. One of the children was facing the punches and kicks of the other children. In just a few moves, he had beaten the other children to the ground, causing their heads to bleed. The adults in the distance did not seem to care. They only laughed when they saw this and praised the strongest child. Tai Tu, you're the strongest among these kids. You might even become a high-ranking official in the future. Honeysuckle curled his lips in the dark. He was much stronger than him. He only needed one hand, no, one little finger to press him to the ground. However, his father and mother had never praised him like this before. This simple praise actually made Honeysuckle feel a little envious. The small figure first jumped onto a house. From here, he could see the main gate. After identifying the direction, he lightly jumped down again. Only half of his hair fell. Honeysuckle's hair was unexpectedly caught by something. He only fell about a meter high before he was suspended in the air. Although no one saw such a delicate little person hanging there, Honeysuckle, who was suspended in the air, looked at the top of his head and then at the bottom of his feet. His mouth twitched, and he almost cried. Fortunately, he remembered that he was sneaking out of the palace, so he forcefully held back his tears. He grabbed his hair alternately with both hands and climbed up just like that. The roof of the beast park was made of wood and straw. Honeysuckle's hair was caught by a piece of wood. After discovering the culprit, Honeysuckle pouted and angrily broke the wood to free his hair. Crack! Who's there? Honeysuckle was startled when he heard the shout from below. He quickly dashed in the direction he was looking for previously. The people below only saw a small figure disappear in a flash. They were immediately startled and shouted loudly, immediately attracting the attention of others. However, he didn't even see the figure clearly. He only saw a shadow and couldn't tell who it was. He only remembered that the person seemed to be very small. However, no one expected that it was the little princess who had sneaked out of the palace. After discussing it, they reported it to the chief and then to their superiors. At this time, Honeysuckle had already disappeared. She saw the palace when she went out of the door. Then, she knew which direction to go. After all, her father had brought her out of the palace more than once or twice. She more or less remembered the way. After avoiding the square in front of the palace, Honeysuckle immediately cheered when she arrived at Jingyang Street. Wow! She had finally sneaked out. Looking at the surging crowd in front of her, Honeysuckle felt excited from the bottom of her heart. Although she had seen it before, it was in her father's arms every time. She had never seen it so clearly and so close to her. The cheerful Honeysuckle immediately pounced into the surging crowd like a husky that had escaped its reins. After walking for a short distance, Honeysuckle's eyes narrowed. There was a fragrance. What a fragrant smell. Following the direction of the fragrance, she could smell that it was coming from a small building. If she could read, she would have recognized the 3 words Shanhuai House on the small building. Although Honeysuckle was illiterate on her first trip out, she remembered that she had smelled the fragrance from this house when she was in her father's arms. Squatting on the opposite side, she saw a few youths walk in with their heads held high. Not long after, a few more youths walked out with their heads held high. Honeysuckle immediately knew what was going on. Mimicking them, Honeysuckle walked through the crowd with her head held high. However, when she saw a bunch of tables and people sitting around them, Honeysuckle was dumbfounded. What should she do next? Girl, what do you want to eat? The one who spoke was a burly and fierce-looking waiter. The scar on his face twitched as he spoke. In other places, he would definitely be a character that would stop children from crying at night. At this moment, he was also sizing up the young girl who looked to be around 7 or 8 years old. She wore a white silk dress on the inside and a blue muslin dress on the outside. This kind of dress was not something that ordinary people could afford. Only the young ladies in Shanhuai House could afford to wear it. Her hair was tied into a single ponytail that reached the back of her ankles, and her small face was extremely exquisite. Needless to say, she was the son of some big shot in the imperial court. An ordinary family would not be able to raise such a child. From the blank look on her face, it was obvious that she rarely went out. Miss, please take a seat first. What would you like to eat? The burly man tried his best to make himself look pleasant. Honeysuckle looked around blankly and thought for a moment. The most delicious spiced lamb leg, braised lamb trotters, medium well-roasted beef, and wild vegetable lamb stew. These are all the best. These are all recipes from the palace. The burly man said in a low, muffled voice. The palace? Honeysuckle pondered. Was the palace her home? Honeysuckle was a little uncertain. After thinking for a moment, Honeysuckle decided to eat first. I want all of them. All right, the burly man said loudly. Most aboriginals were big eaters. The more powerful they were, the more food they could eat. Even though the dishes here were served in bowls, it was not unusual for a little girl to order a table full of dishes. That girl from Minister Tong's family was only half full after eating a table full of dishes. Honeysuckle, on the other hand, had a face full of anticipation as she waited for the other party to cook for her. Eating in the same house with so many strangers was really too novel. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Bookseller's Mobile. Chapter 1005. Have you heard? It said that a truck has just been invented that can run several times faster than a tractor. What truck? Have you heard of steam trains? That thing's rails are about to reach Lawn City. Lu San, didn't your second brother get arrested for stealing the rails? Is he still mining now? Pfft. He snatched the rails and couldn't beat them. The person called Lu San's expression changed instantly as he spat on the ground and corrected him. The Aboriginals despised theft the most, and even commoners rarely stole things. On the other hand, stealing wasn't a big deal. 2 years ago, the price of iron was even more expensive than it was now. Lu San's second brother must have lost his mind and actually tried to snatch the rails with 2 scoundrel friends. In the end, he was overturned and was still mining in the mines. Looking at the time, it would be another year before he could be released. This matter was considered a great humiliation for his family. It wasn't because he tried to snatch the rails, but because he was overturned by the railway patrol team. One had to know that the Liu family was considered a respectable family, yet their son was so disappointing that he had been ridiculed for the past 2 years. The people around them heard the conversation at the table and burst into laughter. The second floor of Shanhuai restaurant was occupied by the children of the rich and powerful. The guests on the first floor were of lower status, but they were all officials in their families. Ordinary people wouldn't come here to eat at all. Even the merchants from the Yun Nation wouldn't come here. Someone noticed Honeysuckle sitting there and asked with a smile, "Have you seen that child before?" He didn't mean any harm. He was just curious that she was sitting there alone despite her exquisite appearance and attire. "I haven't seen her before. I don't know which family she came from." Someone else glanced at her. "She's pretty. In a few years, she'll probably be the one asking for her hand in marriage." The person who spoke was in his 20s, 20 years younger than Honeysuckle. He was also joking with the gaze of an elder looking at a junior. Ordinary people won't be able to get close to her. The aboriginals were straightforward, but they weren't blind, especially the children of the officials. Putting everything else aside, ordinary people wouldn't be able to see anything special about the muslin robe he was wearing. However, looking at its breadth and fineness, it seemed to be an imitation of crystal silk. A bolt of it cost several hundred taels of silver. Even an ordinary official wouldn't be able to afford it, let alone a child. Everyone just chatted for a while and didn't take it to heart. Honeysuckle didn't care that he was being talked about. His face fell when he saw the dishes on the table. "You ate this every day in the palace, and you still want to eat this after coming out?" Another table. Honeysuckle slammed the table and pouted. "I don't want to eat this. Change another table." The waiter from before took a look and immediately removed the items on the table without any hesitation. "This is our restaurant's most famous dish. If you don't like it, what else do you want to eat?" Erhua rolled his eyes and looked around, then pointed at a table and said, "I want those from them." The waiter immediately reported the menu. Honeysuckle slammed the table and yelled, "I want a drink." Hearing this, the surrounding people immediately burst into laughter. "Little girl, how much can you drink?" Someone laughed and shouted. Honeysuckle knew that everyone was calling him, but he didn't know what they were laughing about. When he heard the question, he immediately raised a finger. "A bowl or a jar?" someone asked with a smile. It wasn't a big deal for Aboriginal children to drink a little wine. However, seeing such a cute little girl sitting at the table and asking for wine like a little adult was quite amusing. "I can drink as much as I want," Honeysuckle said in her cute voice. Hearing this, everyone immediately burst into laughter. "Little girl, you're bragging, right? If you don't believe me, I'll show you. Give me wine." Honeysuckle was immediately unhappy when she heard someone questioning her. "Haha, little girl, I'll treat you to a drink. Drink it first before we talk about anything else." Someone at the table next to her handed over half a jar of wine. It was the kind that contained 5 caddies of wine. Half a jar wasn't a small amount. Honeysuckle looked at the huge jar and was immediately dumbfounded. In the palace, she always drank the Empress's wine in secret, and they were all glass bottles. How was she going to drink such a big jar? Seeing her dumbfounded expression, everyone laughed again. Honeysuckle turned her head to see how the others drank. Coincidentally, she saw someone pouring wine from a jar and understood. She jumped onto a stool and poured herself a bowl of wine from the jar. Then, she raised the bowl and drank it in one gulp. "Good. Little girl, you're straightforward." Everyone cheered again. Honeysuckle frowned. It wasn't as good as the one she drank in secret. However, she quickly cheered up again. No one was here to control her, and she wouldn't be scolded by the Empress and her father. She poured another bowl and drank it in one gulp. Seeing that she wanted to drink again, someone said, "Drink slowly. There's no rush." Honeysuckle wrinkled her nose. They had just said that she was bragging. She ignored them. Seeing that she drank another cup, everyone immediately cheered. It was rare for something interesting to happen in Shanhuai House. Little girl, your face isn't even red. You can really drink. I wonder who taught you. Come, let's drink. A burly man laughed heartily and came over, clinking his bowl with honeysuckles. Seeing this, Honeysuckle became even more excited. Seeing that she really wasn't drunk at all, everyone took advantage of their enthusiasm and clinked glasses with her. Although Honeysuckle was surrounded by people every day in the palace, it was different here. Although the people here were a little rough, their enthusiasm and hearty laughter ignited something in her heart. Furthermore, she seemed to sense an unfamiliar emotion from these people's words: approval. In the palace, the Empress and her father treated her like a child. The people here were different. After Honeysuckle drank half the jar of wine, someone brought another jar of wine and invited her to drink. Shanhui House became even more lively. Everyone also began to see something different. It was true that Aboriginal children could drink a little, but this child had drunk so much without any reaction. This meant that her strength was far beyond that of an ordinary person. At the very least, she wasn't at the four-way heaven level. That meant that she was at the Kismet heaven level. To be able to reach the Kismet heaven stage at such a young age, only a few geniuses could compare to him, right? For example, Shurgon from the Great Elder's family and Tong Lan from Minister Tong's family. No one knew which family this girl belonged to, but she was actually so powerful. However, everyone was relieved. Since she was at the Kismet heaven level, they didn't have to worry about her drinking. With this little girl around, Shanhui House was especially lively today. Even the second floor was affected by the people downstairs. Someone hurried downstairs and saw a fair and delicate child standing on a stool with one foot on the table and the other on it. She was drinking bowl after bowl of wine. Many regulars of Shanhui House were cheering at the side, and every time, someone would drink with her. In just a short while, there was a pile of wine jars on the floor. Lu San, if you keep drinking, you'll lose all of your food money for this month. I can't lose to such a little girl. That would be embarrassing. The person called Lu San said fiercely. In fact, he had already lost a jar of wine to Honeysuckle, but he stubbornly refused to stop. The rich and powerful children who had come down to investigate went up and told them about this matter. Everyone else became curious and came down to see this little girl who could drink so much. Which family is she from? Do you know? I've never seen her before. Have you seen her before? No. This little girl is interesting. I'll go up and drink with her. So many of you are taking turns to fight a little girl. Aren't you embarrassed? This girl is interesting. Look at her. She drinks so much, but she's completely fine. I heard she just said that she could keep drinking. I want to see what she's talking about. At this moment, Honeysuckle was very happy. She had never felt so carefree in her life. In her eyes, everyone here was a good person. She really hoped that they would come to the palace to play with her. She didn't refuse anyone. Even if no one touched her bowl, she would still drink. The sound of bowls clinking against bowls was endless. Even the passers-by outside could hear the loud cheers and toasts coming from Shanhui House. There was even a burly man who took off his clothes and jumped onto the table to sing a wild hunting song. With the first, there was a second. The rough singing quickly spread from the house to the outside. In the crowd, Honeysuckle copied the others. She held a bowl of wine in one hand and slammed the table with the other, shouting and laughing loudly. Chapter 1006. Rinpoche and the Empress stood on the roof. Below them was Jingyang Street, which was a few meters wide, and across the road was the noisy Shanhui restaurant. Unlike before, there was almost no one on the second floor of Shanhui restaurant. Instead, the first floor was bustling with noise. Cheers and laughter could be heard from afar. The Empress moved her ears and caught a childish voice in the wind. "Bring her out," the Empress said with a sullen face. Rinpoche looked at the crowded restaurant that was in full swing and fell in a deep thought. Erhua is drinking in there, and as his father, I'm being squeezed out. It's not good, right? It's too embarrassing, Rinpoche said seriously. Almost no one was below the Kismet heaven level in the group. If he didn't reveal his name, he probably wouldn't be able to squeeze in. revealing his name just to squeeze in and drag Erhua out. This momentum was too weak. The Empress looked at him resentfully and said, "I told you to focus on your cultivation, and now you know how to be embarrassed? I'm too busy. It's good enough that I can maintain Rui visualization every day." Rinpochian wasn't trying to shirk his responsibilities, but he was really too busy. Ever since his wedding with the Empress, he hadn't been idle at all. There were too many things in his mind. There were too many things that needed to be developed in this world, and his mind was constantly thinking about them. How could he not race against time to develop to the level of technology that had been developed on Earth for 200 to 300 years in just a few decades? The Empress knew that he was busy, so she didn't say anything else and moved to the entrance of Shanhui Restaurant. Before anyone could react, his surging aura smashed towards the people in the building like a tsunami. Immediately, the people who were still laughing and laughing were scattered all over the place. The Empress saw Erhua, who was standing in the middle with one foot on a stool and the other on a table. His sleeves were rolled up, and he was holding a bowl of wine in one hand and a jar of wine in the other. At this moment, Erhua was in a state of extreme shock and was completely dumbfounded. In the midst of the merriment, she had forgotten that she had snuck out. When she saw the Empress now, she was naturally shocked. Then she stuttered, "Mother, mother." The Empress took a step forward and arrived at her side. She lifted her by the collar, took another step forward, and was already outside the door. In a few flashes, she had returned to the palace. After a moment of extreme shock, the people in Shanhui House finally burst out. "His Majesty came just now. It's actually the little princess. We were drinking with the little princess just now. The little princess is not even 3 years old yet, right?" Only then did everyone realize that the little girl who had been drinking just now was actually the little princess. One could imagine the shock in their hearts. Rinpochian stood at the door and coughed softly. He was also puzzled. He often brought honeysuckle out, but no one recognized her. Zhao Prince Consort. Everyone turned to greet him. In the past, everyone looked down on Rinpochian. However, with the rapid changes in Dayo over the past 2 years, everyone only had respect for him. It wasn't just in Lan City, but also in the Yun Nation, the Qin Nation, and Great Xia. But this time, it wasn't because of Qi Zixiao's gigolo. If the Empress was said to be one of the most talented women in the world, then Rinpochian could be said to be one of the smartest people in the world. The various changes in Dayo and all kinds of novel but useful things had all been verified. It could be said that in just a few years, Rinpochian had become famous all over the world. All of this couldn't be separated from the propaganda of the merchants of the Yun Nation. The auction of tractors and glass dealerships raked in 15 million taels of silver. Later, tractors with 30, 40, and 50 horsepower were introduced one after another, and a variety of technologies were introduced. This included the production of all kinds of paper and paper shells, the production techniques of toothbrushes, toothpaste, soap, and other items, as well as the production methods of new distilled liquor, the production methods of candy, and the new textile technology. All of these were thrown out by him in one fell swoop. There was no other way, as there was a shortage of people. Now that he couldn't even recruit workers, he could only abandon these industries and transfer the workers to more important industries. Of course, he also had plans to expand the market and share the profits with the other ministers. After all, everything was monopolized by the royal family, and it was too unsightly to enjoy such a good life. He directly threw these technologies to the ministers in the court. How could these ministers understand these things? Although they knew that they were good stuff, how many people could they have under them? At this time, Rinpochian gave them another idea. Join forces with the merchants of the Yun Nation. It was said to be an alliance. They would provide the technology, and the merchants of the Yun Nation would provide the money and labor. The profits would be split 70 to 30. Although the merchants of the Yun Nation could only get 30%, they could use this opportunity to gain the backing of the big shots in the court, which was exactly what they wanted. After abandoning these industries that didn't have much technical content, Rinpochian finally had more manpower. The big shots in the court were very grateful to Rinpochian, as they could earn a large sum of money just by sitting at home. As for the people of the Yun Nation, not only did they get new technology, but they also found a big backer. It could be said that everyone was happy. The most important point was that this method directly narrowed the distance between the Yun Nation and the Aboriginals. The big merchants and families of the Yun Nation were entangled with the Aboriginals, so both sides were naturally much closer. The attitude of the upper class also affected the ordinary people of the lower class. As a result, the Yun Nation was much more stable. If anyone wanted to rebel, these merchants who were involved would be the first to tell on them. Of course, it wasn't that there weren't any disadvantages. It could be said that Rinpoche directly exposed the collusion between the officials and the merchants in Dayo, which was still justifiable. He had directly planted a flower of darkness on this plain and unadorned land. However, this was also done after weighing all aspects. After the people were enlightened, he would rectify this situation. Moreover, the rearguard commandery would always keep an eye on those merchants. When a bad sign appeared, he would make a move on them, killing the chicken to warn the monkey. The others didn't know what he was planning. Even if they knew a little, they wouldn't be able to guess everything. However, the benefits were real, and everyone could see them. One could imagine how the people of the Yun Nation felt about this Zhao, prince consort. Thanks to their publicity, Rinpoche was now really famous in the world. In turn, it actually affected the perception of many people in Lan City. Even outsiders were so respectful of him. Not to mention that he had already done so many great things and brought about so many changes. As long as these people weren't pebbles, they would naturally change as well. As a result, many of the officials in Shanhuai House were very respectful when they saw Rinpoche. It was completely different from a few years ago. Rinpoche didn't care about this change in attitude and didn't feel particularly good about it. On the one hand, he only had one person in his heart and didn't care about others. After all, he was already a few decades old. According to the age on Earth, he was now more than 50 years old. 10 years in Dayo was 30 years on Earth, and he was 55 years old. According to the lifespan on Earth, it could be said that he had 1 foot in the grave and didn't care so much about other people's opinions. On the other hand, he was used to this attitude. Of course, who would dare to believe that he was 55 years old when he returned to Earth with his burly waist and ferocious face? 35 was more like it. Ren Wanyin didn't dare to walk with Rinpoche now. No matter how one looked at it, Rinpoche looked 20 years younger. Tom hardly left any traces on his face. His hair and beard, which were easily eroded by time, didn't even leave a trace. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 1007. When Rinpoche entered Shanhuai House, everyone subconsciously made way for him. "That was Yuqing just now," Rinpoche said bluntly. It was rare that he didn't call her Erhua. Even without him saying it, everyone knew that it was the little princess. Rinpoche smiled at everyone and said, "This child has been in the palace for a long time and always wants to see the outside world. She sneaked out today." Everyone thought of this as well. When they saw her, they knew that she was a child who sneaked out from a wealthy family. She didn't understand anything in this world and often had a blank expression on her face. She looked adorable and made people want to pinch her. Those who had this thought were glad that they didn't pinch her. They regretted it after thinking about it. If only they had pinched her, they would have something to brag about in the future. I also pinched the face of the current princess. After more than 100 years, it would become, I also pinched the face of the current empress. Thinking about it, it would be so cool to say it. Those people regretted it even more when they thought about it. Seeing that all of you like her, I'm very happy as a father. After all, she is my daughter. Rinpoche laughed. Everyone laughed as well. However, the next time you see her, you still have to report to the palace early. You know the importance of her identity, Rinpoche added. Don't worry, Zhao Prince Consort. If anyone wants to hurt the little princess, they have to do it over our dead bodies first. Someone immediately said, That's right. Never let anyone hurt the little princess. Everyone agreed. It's not just because of this. Her Majesty will also be worried if she finds out that she sneaked out of the palace, Rinpoche continued. In fact, he wasn't very worried about Erhua's safety in Lan City. In any case, she was their child. Understood. Hearing that Her Majesty was mentioned, everyone looked solemn and said, "If you see the little princess sneaking out again, you must report to the palace." Rinpoche nodded, picked up the wine jar and bowl that Qi Yuqing had drunk from, and poured himself a cup. "Today is a good day, and I'll drink with all of you." After saying that, he downed the cup. When the wine entered his stomach, Rinpoche understood that it was about 23 to 24 degrees. Following which, Rinpoche smiled at everyone and said, "Today's wine is on my daughter. I won't be paying for it." Everyone immediately scratched their heads and laughed. "Zhao Prince Consort, what are you talking about?" Rinpoche nodded at everyone before leaving. He was really happy, which was why he said so much. As for the reason, it was simple. It was obvious that these people liked two flowers very much. This is the joy of being a father. These people were the descendants of officials, and in the future, they would also become officials in the imperial court. This scene made him feel that when Erhua grew up, he could also become an emperor who was as prestigious as the Empress and loved by the officials and people. When he came here, he was prepared for a mixed doubles match. However, after seeing the scene in Shanhui House, the anger in Rinpoche's heart disappeared without a trace, and he changed his mind. Even though he had changed his mind, the Empress hadn't. Rinpoche was still at the palace gate when he heard a cry coming from inside. Doubtlessly, Honeysuckle was beaten up again. Upon entering the palace, he saw the palace guards standing there obediently, not even daring to breathe loudly. The fury of the Empress made them feel pressured. Rinpoche smiled and paced around the palace slowly. He wasn't in a hurry to go back and see his daughter get beaten up. After a while, when Erhua's crying and laughter stopped, Rinpoche went back. He saw the Empress sitting there with a cold expression. He couldn't see any anger, but it was still very cold. Erhua was sitting on a small stool with a small table in front of her. She was obediently copying the three-character classic. Rinpoche looked at Erhua's movements and knew that she was suspended in the air. He reckoned that her, but was swollen from being beaten by the Empress and didn't dare to sit. Xianzhu will be back in 2 days. At that time, it won't be easy for her to escape. Rinpoche smiled at the Empress. The Empress relaxed a little when she heard this name. It had been 3 years. Back then, the Empress had sent her and Lin Xiaola to the mines in a fit of anger. It was about time for them to return. The Empress always felt that Xianzhu was more trustworthy. Just like Qing Yuan and Hong Wan, who were lively and clever back then, they were now 30 years old. However, the Empress was still reluctant to let them out of the palace. As for the two of them, they were used to staying in the palace and had no intention of going out. Has Her Majesty regretted letting her out for so many years? Rinpoche asked with a smile as he sat opposite the Empress. The Empress rolled her eyes at him. Whose fault was this? She said, "Meritorious service should be rewarded, and mistakes should be punished." Erhua, who was at the side, pricked up her ears and listened to the conversation between her father and mother. Who was Xianzhu? She stopped what she was doing. The Empress glanced at her, and Erhua shivered. She pouted her lips and continued copying the three-character classic with a look of deep hatred. She hated the person who wrote this book to the core. 2 days later, 2 women sat on jumping sheep and entered the city under the protection of a group of guards. One of them was wearing shabby clothes, a pair of glasses, and her hair was tied up simply at the back of her head. She looked around curiously. It had changed. It was very different from before she left. Apart from the tractor she saw on the road, Lan City had also changed a lot. The most obvious change was that it was livelier. The shops on both sides of Jingyang Street that were originally closed were now open. From time to time, people from the Yun Nation and the Jing tribe could be seen greeting customers in the shops. There were fewer people fighting. Both sides of the road were crowded with pedestrians, and one would bump into someone every few steps. Originally, there should have been a fight, but she didn't see any fighting after walking for so long. As she walked, a sweet fragrance wafted into her nose. Lin Xiaola, who was originally drowsy on her mount, suddenly had her ears pricked up. She even trembled, and saliva dripped down her face. Following the smell, she saw that it was the imperial pastries. When Zhao Prince Consort came last year, he said that the imperial pastries were opened in the city and that Lin Xiaola would definitely like this place. A gust of wind blew past Exenja, and Lin Xiaola was nowhere to be seen. A moment later, Lin Xiaola came out of the imperial pastries with a handful of sweets in her arms. Exenja frowned. Actually, she didn't like Lin Xiaola very much as she was too lazy. Furthermore, she was robbing the imperial shop. Did she want to go to the mines and bask in the sun for a few more years? Before she could finish her thoughts, a lady in white rushed out of the imperial pastries. She was about 17 or 18 years old and extremely beautiful. Coupled with her white, wide-sleeved robe, she looked like a fairy from a painting. However, at this moment, she had a murderous look on her face. Lin Xiaola, you actually came back and even dared to snatch my sweets. Lin Xiaola didn't pay attention to her at all. In a flash, she jumped onto the roof and dashed toward the imperial palace. Bastard, I'm not done with you. The young lady was furious, but she couldn't catch up with Lin Xiaola. She could only stand on the roof and watch Lin Xiaola's disappearing figure. She clenched her teeth and swore that she would definitely take revenge. Xin recognized the young lady the moment she came out. She was Tonglan. She also frequently entered the imperial palace. Although she had grown up quite a bit, her features were still there. When she saw the imperial palace in front of her, Xin felt refreshed. She was finally back. Lin Xiaola was squatting in front of the imperial palace. Her cheeks were still bulging, and Xin didn't know how much sweets she had stuffed in. "Commander, you're back." The imperial guards shouted when they saw Xin. "I'm not the commander." Xin waved her hand. She was still a nobody. "Commander, you might not know this, but Commander Jiang has been promoted and transferred to the Protectorate of the South," a guard immediately said with a smile. Commander Jiang was Jiang Ningyun, the champion of the lantern-grabbing contest back then and the commander of the Imperial Guards for the past 3 years. Before Xin returned, Jiang Ningyun had been promoted and transferred to the Protectorate of the South. The significance of this was self-evident. "Her Majesty's trust in Commander has not decreased at all," another guard said. When Xin heard this, her eyebrows twitched slightly, and a warm feeling flowed through her heart. She would be able to see Her Majesty and Zhao Prince Consort soon. She wondered what the child of Her Majesty and Zhao Prince Consort would be like. Xin's expression was still cold, but her heart was very warm. Chapter 1008. Xinjia, Lin Xiaola, received the decree. As soon as Xinjia and Lin Xiaola entered the palace, they were stopped by a group of guards. Apart from the leader, there was another person behind him carrying a tray. Xin was stunned. She cupped her hands respectfully and said, "Xinjia accepts the decree. Her Majesty has decreed that Xinjia will be reinstated as the commander of the Imperial Palace Guards, and Lin Xiaola will be reinstated as the librarian of Qingxin Palace Hall. The two of them will take up their posts immediately." The Imperial Guard cupped his hands at the two of them and said, "Congratulations, Commander and Librarian Lin. His Majesty wants the two of you to take a bath and change your clothes before having an audience with him." "Yes," Xin replied. He lowered his head and looked at his shabby clothes. It was indeed not suitable for him to meet His Majesty. It seemed that His Majesty had already thought of this. Xin's armor, the token from the palace, and Lin Xiaola's clothes were on the tray. "The commander's residence in the palace is still there. Nothing has changed," the guard said. "Reporting to Your Majesty, Xinjia will have an audience with the Emperor after bathing and changing her clothes." Xinjia cupped her hands in greeting and took the tray. With the imperial edict and token, she could be considered to have been reinstated. After that, Xinjia didn't need anyone to lead her. She was familiar with the palace, so she carried the token back to her residence in the palace. Along the way, all the guards she met bowed respectfully to her. Although Exinja had just returned, she was still their leader in their hearts. When he returned to his courtyard, it was clean. It seemed that someone had just cleaned it. Exinja went to the courtyard to fetch water for a bath. She had never relied on others to do these things before. After taking a bath and changing her clothes, Exinja carefully caressed the familiar armor before putting it on again. He walked out of the courtyard and called for a guard. "Where's Librarian Lin?" As soon as she asked the question, she knew that there was no need to ask anymore. He went straight to Qingxin Palace Hall. Sure enough, Lin Xiaola was lying face down in the courtyard with the tray thrown aside. Only the candy that she snatched from Tonglan was still tightly clenched in her hand. Exinja didn't hold back and kicked him. The hairs on Lin Xiaola's body stood on end. She jumped up and struck with her claw. This move wasn't very effective against Rinpochian, so it was even more useless against Exinja. "Put on your clothes and follow me to see Her Majesty," Exinja said coldly. Only then did Lin Xiaola remember that she still had something to do. He changed into his clothes in the yard, yawned, and said, "Let's go." The eerie old woman sitting on the second floor of Qingxin Palace twitched her ears and cursed. This girl has forgotten who picked her up. Although Supervisor Lin's feelings for Lin Xiaola were like that of a kitten or puppy, but she didn't expect that the lass would fall asleep in the courtyard when she came back, and then she went to see His Majesty, completely forgetting about her. For a moment, he felt that he had raised an ingrate all these years. The two of them headed to the Azure Cloud Palace, which was the current location of the Empress. Originally, the Emperor's sleeping quarters were located in the center of the palace. After it collapsed, they moved to the west side, and when the west side collapsed, they moved to the east side. Over the past few years, the interior of the palace had been demolished and rebuilt, and Rinpochian and the Empress could be considered to be living in less than half of the palace. Counting the number of palaces that the Han nation's emperors had lived in for more than a dozen generations, the total number of palaces that they had lived in was probably less than that of 2 emperors. Now, the entire palace was waiting for the new palace to be built so that they wouldn't have to go through any more trouble. As for the instigator of all this, the roaring emperor was still diligently digging holes in the ground while no one was looking. The cobweb-like passageways under the palace that Honeysuckle had walked through were his masterpieces. Now, that place had become a place for Honeysuckle to explore, and he was always able to find something that tasted good. When they arrived outside the Azure Cloud Palace, the two of them heard a series of children cheering. They looked in the direction of the sound and saw a 7- or 8-year-old child jumping up and down along the trees in the courtyard. In a short while, the child jumped in front of the two of them and looked at them curiously. Looking at the pair of phoenix eyes that were exactly the same as the Empress's, the two of them knew who this child was. Exinja also squeezed out a smile and said, "Princess, who are you?" Honeysuckle looked up at Exinja curiously, sniffed, and his attention was quickly attracted by something else. She moved her feet and appeared in front of Lin Xiaola. She circled around her and reached for the bag of sweets on Lin Xiaola's waist. This bag was given to her by Rinpochian, and it just so happened to contain the sweets that she had snatched from Tonglan. Smack! Honeysuckle stared at the bag at Lin Xiaola's waist and felt a pain in his hand. Lin Xiaola's ears trembled, and she bared her canine teeth. "It's mine." Honeysuckle was stunned. After being in the palace for so long, this was the first time that someone actually hit her without giving her anything. For a moment, she forgot to cry. "This is a princess." Exinja's face turned cold, and she really wanted to give her a kick. "I'm also a secretary," Lin Xiaola said disapprovingly. "I've always been the one robbing others. Well, has anyone ever robbed me?" Exinja's expression changed. "The princess is still a child." Lin Xiaola rolled her eyes, covered the bag of sweets with one hand, and said, "Who isn't a child? She wasn't even an adult yet." Exinja almost choked to death. If Her Majesty wasn't inside, she would have had a fight with her first. She glared at Exinja and went to see Her Majesty first before finding an opportunity to keep an eye on her. Xinja had known for a long time that Lin Xiaola was a secretary in Qingxin Palace Hall, but the two of them had never interacted much. After going to the mines for 3 years, Xinja finally knew what kind of person Lin Xiaola was. Her impression of Lin Xiaola had long since dropped to the freezing point. Zhao Prince Consort could tolerate her, but Xinja couldn't, given her rigid character. Honeysuckle finally came to her senses. She pouted and wanted to cry, but she was afraid that her father would hear her and scold her again. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked around. With a slight movement, she arrived at the flower bed. She reached down with her small hands and pulled out a finger-long earth dragon from the soil. Swap! Honeysuckle stretched out her hand and looked at Lin Xiaola expectantly. No! Lin Xiaola covered the bag of sweets. She wasn't interested in insects. More tears welled up in Honeysuckle's eyes. She jumped onto the tree and grabbed a one-horned beetle. She raised her little hand in front of Lin Xiaola and said, "Swap." No. Xinja's face started to turn ashen. Even if she had to risk being punished by Her Majesty, she had to teach this unruly person a lesson. Honeysuckle's eyes were red and her nose was sniffling. She looked like she was about to cry. After thinking for a long time, she climbed up the tree and took down something the size of an adult's palm. Xinja's mouth twitched. She could clearly see that it was a skinned and dried rat. Many aborigines ate this kind of thing, but who would dare to let this little princess eat it? Swap! Honeysuckle looked at Lin Xiaola stubbornly. Sure. Lin Xiaola beamed with joy the moment she saw the thing. She carefully took out a piece of candy from the bag of sweets and stuffed it into Honeysuckle's hand. Then, she snatched the dried rat from her hand and hung it on her waist. We're even, Lin Xiaola said with a smile. Honeysuckle looked at the nail-sized piece of candy in her hand. She didn't feel that it was a loss to exchange such a big dried rat for it. She directly threw the candy into her mouth and squinted her eyes. She knew the meaning of happiness just by looking at her face. Her Majesty wants both of you to have an audience. At this moment, the guard's voice sounded. Xinja glared at Lin Xiaola unwillingly before turning around and walking in silently. Please remember the domain name of this book. Com. Wonderful Book House mobile version website. Com. Chapter 1009. Your Majesty, Your Highness. Xinja greeted her, and Lin Xiaola followed suit. Only in front of the Empress could Lin Xiaola be a little proper. Of course, it was only a little, and it wouldn't last long. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been mining for 3 years instead of 1 year. However, Lin Xiaola felt wronged. She was sleepy, and she couldn't control herself. What could she do? The Empress looked at the two of them and said faintly, "No need to be so polite. From the looks of it, you two have changed over the past 3 years." She was in a good mood, but she didn't show it. Xinja looked like she had been through a lot, and her eyes were a little different from before. As for Lin Xiaola, she was tan because she slept on the roof every day. The Empress was naturally aware of their behavior. However, she couldn't be bothered with Lin Xiaola. Being banished for 3 years was enough for her. You made a big mistake, so I naturally have to punish you and ask you to reflect on it. Now that you are back and have been punished, I have restored you to your original positions, which means that I trust you. If you make any more mistakes, it will be a slap to my face. Do you understand? The Empress stared at the two of them. Your Majesty, I will do my best. I won't let you down. Xinja cupped her hands. Me too. Lin Xiaola quickly followed. Where did that rat behind you come from? Rinpoche asked with a faint smile. In fact, the Empress had already heard what had just happened outside and told Rinpoche about it. In other words, Lin Xiaola really didn't learn from her mistakes. However, the Water Empress was clear that this was the character of this lass. Lin Xiaola immediately said righteously, "This is to tell the little princess that you can't reap without hard work. Didn't you make me do a lot of things in the past before giving me 2 pieces of candy?" Xinja glared at her. She had tolerated Lin Xiaola for a long time, but she was still so rude in front of the Empress. Rinpoche thought about it carefully and felt that this was indeed the case. Lin Xiaola could be said to be the cheapest spirit wheel expert. Her salary was the same as a librarian in the palace, and she only received a few pieces of candy as a reward. With this thought, Rinpoche didn't say anything more. Forget it. You just returned. You should familiarize yourselves first. In the past few years, the palace and Lan City have also undergone some changes, the Empress said. These words were mainly directed at Xianjia. As for Lin Xiaola, she was just changing a place to sleep. The Empress waved her hand to dismiss them, shook her head, and said, Lin Xiaola is still the same. Doesn't Her Majesty already know? Rinpoche laughed. The Empress pondered for a while and said, I'm too lenient toward her. I still need to find an opportunity to discipline her. In fact, when the Empress was young, Lin Xiaola was already about the same age as she was now. When the Empress first saw her, she felt that she was like an elder sister. Of course, this feeling didn't last long. It lasted for about a day. When the two left, they saw two flowers again. Next to Erhua was a young woman in a silk dress who didn't look gentle at all. She held a fruit in one hand and placed it next to Erhua's mouth with the other. Your Highness, I am Xianjia. From today onwards, I will be the commander of the palace guards. Xianjia greeted the two flowers. Honeysuckle thought for a moment. Oh, he continued to nibble on the fruit. Xianjia smiled, bowed to two flowers, and then left. As for Lin Xiaola, she yawned and swayed her feet as she followed. Before he could walk 100 meters, Xianjia kicked him without any warning. Lin Xiaola was startled, jumped up a tree, and asked, What are you doing? If you're so rude again, I will definitely teach you etiquette. Xianjia said with a cold face. As if you know etiquette. Tell me, what does etiquette in the palace include? I don't know you money. Lin Xiaola snorted. Don't forget that she was a scholar of Qingxin Palace Hall. Even though she slept for a living, she would occasionally read a few books when she was awake. Xianjia was stunned and stumped by Lin Xiaola's question. She stood there and pondered for a while before turning around and leaving. That night, Rinpoche was stunned when he heard Xianjia's request. Xianjia wanted to learn etiquette from the palace? In his impression, Xianjia was a woman who didn't know anything other than practicing martial arts and doing her job. Today, she was actually enlightened and wanted to learn etiquette from the palace? What kind of stimulation was this? However, this was a small matter. He immediately agreed and informed the female official. The female official in charge of etiquette in the palace was probably so bored that she was going to rot Xianjia's salt. From the next day onward, she would spend an hour learning etiquette every day. I'm finally going to graduate. Du Laolu showed an exaggerated expression. 7 years, 7 years. What have I been doing for the past 6 years? Algebra, geometry, physics, and chemistry. I'm going crazy. I really don't know how I managed to endure it. If it weren't for my father's disapproval, I would have graduated 3 years ago and lived a good life. Su Peng said angrily. These days, the highest-ranking students in the academy began to get excited. After enduring for 7 years, they could finally graduate. Everyone was excited, as if they were about to start a new life. They could finally say goodbye to Yagüe. They could finally say goodbye to those damn classes. They could finally stop doing homework. The students who were about to leave the abyss of misery began to become bolder and would hang around Rinpoche from time to time. They only wanted to express one thing. Bite me. In any case, they would graduate in half a month. Tong Lan, who was wearing a white coat, sat there and proofread the drawings in her hands. Without looking up, she said, Isn't it too early for all of you to be happy? We haven't even graduated yet. It's not early anymore. There are only 10 more days. Du Laolu stretched out his hand and gestured 10. Don't be too ostentatious. Be careful that extreme joy begets sorrow. For example, you can only graduate if you pass the exam. Shurgan smiled at everyone. Shurgan, who was originally delicate and pretty, had now become burly and had a full beard. It looked like his brain was full of muscles. However, all the students knew that Shurgan had the best overall qualities among this batch of students. Whether it was his academic results, ability to handle affairs, or even dealing with people, Shurgan was extremely good at them. If anyone thought that he was as straightforward as he looked, they wouldn't even know that they were tricked by him. It's just an exam. Dulalu laughed and said confidently, "At most, we can take a makeup exam. We will pass after a few more times." Many students gave him the middle finger. This was what they learned from the manga. Seeing how confident he was, they thought that he was confident about the exam, but it turned out that he was confident about the makeup exam. While everyone was chatting and laughing, Rinpoche came to the door, saw the lively classroom, and knocked on the door with a strange smile. "Yague is here." Everyone immediately sat back in their seats. Although he was about to graduate, Rinpoche's prestige was still there. "We will graduate in 10 days. Does anyone have any thoughts?" Rinpoche walked to the podium and smiled. "We can't bear to part with Principal Ren," someone blurted out. Everyone immediately looked strange. Couldn't bear to part with Yague? They wished they could never see him again in this life. "I can't bear to part with all of you either." Rinpoche acted as if he didn't see the strange expressions on everyone's faces. Everyone's hearts tightened. Yague wouldn't be up to something, right? However, all good things must come to an end. Rinpoche smiled at everyone. Everyone finally felt a little relieved, and a relaxed smile appeared on their faces once again. "However, before you graduate, I have something to inform all of you." Rinpoche's eyes were smiling. He had been watching the excitement of these students for the past few days. However, in order not to disturb their excitement, there was something that he hadn't told them. It was time to tell them now. "Please speak, Principal Run." Everyone looked relaxed. It didn't matter what the notice was. After all, there were only 10 days left. Everyone could finally escape from the abyss of suffering. "First of all, congratulations to all of you for graduating from Black Bamboo Academy's high school. You can be said to be the first batch of highly educated people in Dayo," Rinpoche said. Everyone nodded their heads. They were still confident about this. Although 7 years was tough, they did learn a lot. They were still very grateful to Rinpoche for this. "Next, I will announce one more thing." Rinpoche looked at everyone. "In 10 days, Black Bamboo Academy." Rinpoche kept them guessing, paused for a moment, and then said with a smile, "We will establish a university department." Everyone was shocked. "What? Congratulations to all of you for bidding farewell to high school and starting a brand new university life." Rinpoche was pleased to see that everyone's expressions froze. This included Tonglan and Shurgon. Everyone widened their eyes and looked at Rinpoche. "Principal, what? Under normal circumstances, you will spend 3 years in middle school, 3 years in high school, and university will be missing. 4 years later, you will truly become the top talents of Dayo." Huh? Everyone's expression changed drastically as they exclaimed, "University? There are still 4 years left?" Everyone, who was originally excited about graduating, felt as if they had been struck by lightning. All of them were crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. These 3 years in high school were already countless times more difficult than middle school. They had suffered countless beatings and punishments before they could finally graduate. But now, Yague was telling them that there was still university? There were still 4 years left? Even in the hot Dayo, everyone felt as if they had been splashed with a basin of ice water from head to toe. Of course, you can also enter the various departments after graduating from high school. You'd better go back and discuss this with your families. Of course, I will also listen to your family's opinions." Rinpoche smiled amiably. Drop out of high school and enter the various departments? Even if they were willing, would their families be willing? Huh? Graduation? Hee hee. Do you think you can graduate? Do you think you can graduate in 4 years? Looking at their expressions, Rinpoche was very happy. He had endured for so long just to tell them this touching news today. "Well, I should be able to play around again in 4 years. Let me tell you that there is an advanced profession called masters. There is also an advanced profession called doctors. After that, there is an advanced profession called Saint Seiya." All right, school is over. Rinpoche strolled out of the door, leaving behind a group of completely petrified students. Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. No advertising words. Chapter 10:10. That day, after school, the students of this year's batch were all pale, their eyes lifeless as they floated out. After 6 years of suffering, they thought that they could finally see the light, but they found that they were greeted by an even deeper darkness. Thinking about the next 4 years, everyone wanted to cry, but had no tears. The students of the other batches were puzzled at first. These seniors have been in high spirits recently, so why did they suddenly look like they were living a life worse than death? When they found out about the situation, all of their faces turned pale. The future of these seniors was also their future. Some people were living a life worse than death, and naturally, some people were happy. For example, Jean Cassien really liked this place. With the teachers around, the students were also interesting, could learn all kinds of interesting things, and could even go to the library to read interesting comics. She didn't like to work in any department, and her family wasn't short of money. It couldn't be better for her to continue studying in this school. 10 days later, the first batch of students graduated again. However, this time, the graduation party was much simpler. This time, all the students from ordinary families, except for one person, chose to graduate. After all, for them and their families, this level of learning was enough. Another 4 years of learning was too much for them. After all, the family situation of ordinary people couldn't support them to continue studying like this. They didn't want it to be like this. Dayo was currently undergoing changes. Lan City and Dayo were different every month. When they were at the school, they often wanted to participate in the changes as they watched from the sidelines. Therefore, they chose to graduate and work in the 6 departments. Rinpoche understood this very well. As for the descendants of the influential families, none of the successful ones graduated. All of them entered university. Amidst the wailing, the first thing that greeted them was the entrance exam in a month's time. At this time, in the imperial court, a group of people had their eyes on a small table in the center. On the table was a black box with a disc with numbers from 0 to 9 written on it. There was also a wire on the box that connected it to the outside of the hall. Rinpoche held the microphone on the box with one hand and rotated the disc with the other. After a while, a beeping sound came from the microphone. After only one ring, the other end was picked up. "Your Highness, we succeeded." Rinpoche looked at everyone and smiled. Before anyone could react, the person on the other end of the phone cheered. Rinpoche said a few words of encouragement to the other end of the phone before hanging up and looking at everyone in the hall with a smile. "Your Highness, isn't this the same as the radio station from before?" Shi Qing asked. Although Rinpoche didn't explain, they had already guessed the purpose of this box. No, a radio station is a radio station. The radio station is where we talk to each other in different channels. It is a fixed frequency communication. There were a few disadvantages. First, the number of fixed frequencies was limited, and the radio station could not be used by everyone. Secondly, if someone else got their hands on the radio, they would be able to hear the conversation on the channel. Although this had not happened before, it did not mean that it would not happen in the future. Thirdly, the radio station's ability to resist interference is weak. For example, radio stations can't be used in Tianjin Basin. They didn't understand the technology and didn't understand the meaning behind his words. However, from Rinpoche's words, he could tell that this box was something better than a radio station. "Introduce them to me," the Empress said faintly from her seat of honor. "Yes." He smiled at the Empress. Then he turned around and said, "This is a telephone, which is used for long-distance communication like a radio station. There is no need to elaborate on the other 2 points. First, this is point-to-point communication. A telephone only needs to dial the corresponding number to communicate with any other telephone. For example, this telephone can communicate point-to-point with any department in the 6 departments or any department in any city at any time. Everything that is said can only be heard by the person at the other end of the line." Everyone nodded. This time they understood. The radio station was for everyone to chat together, but this telephone was for 2 people to chat privately. Second, and most importantly, the popularity of the telephone. Telephones can be installed in any place in Dayo, and there can be millions or even tens of millions of telephones. Whether it is in every department, every city, or even every household. Everyone could use a phone to dial the corresponding number to talk to one of the millions of phones out there. For example, Sir Shur can install such a telephone in his residence. As long as I have the corresponding number of Sir Shur's home telephone, I can call his residence from any place at any time and talk to him through any telephone. For example, all of you can contact him through the telephone in any corner of Lan City or Dayo. Even if you are in the 60,000 mountains, you can contact him through the telephone. After Rinpoche finished speaking, he smiled and looked at everyone. He had to wait for them to react. Although they had seen enough new things over the years, they still needed some time to digest Rinpoche's words. On Earth, the early application of the telephone was the magnet telephone, which was the kind in movies that generated electricity by hand while making a call. After that, the operator would transfer the call. After that, there was the common battery telephone, which no longer needed to generate electricity by hand. However, it still needed the operator of the telephone exchange to transfer the call manually. This kind of telephone needed to be transferred manually, so there weren't many numbers. Naturally, there weren't many users. At that time, the largest telephone exchange in Asia, Shanghai, had only a few thousand users. The biggest limitation of the telephone wasn't the technology of the telephone, but the technology of the telephone interaction. The first two types were manually connected. After that, there was the step-by-step switchboard, which allowed the telephone to be connected mechanically. However, there were also many shortcomings, especially the high power consumption and the difficulty of maintenance. Knowing that this kind of thing would enter millions of households sooner or later, Rinpoche naturally eliminated it. What he used was the more mature vertical and horizontal switchboard technology. In the 50s and 60s on Earth, the use of this kind of switchboard had become mainstream. In China, it was used until the 80s and 90s. Of course, this was also a technology that would be eliminated sooner or later. However, the next generation of technology required electronic technology. Rinpoche waited for a long time before the faces of everyone gradually began to change. Your Highness, do you mean that this thing can be installed in our residences? Not only in your residences, but also in everyone's homes, including those villages in the mountains. Rinpoche corrected. Of course, this was on the premise that those birds that had nothing better to do and played with wires had to be driven away. The cities were fine, but there were many beasts in the wilderness that liked to pull wires or dig holes. Everyone suddenly exclaimed. Installed such a phone in everyone's home? Please remember the domain name of this book. Com. Wonderful Book House mobile version. Com. Chapter 10-11. For the time being, it wasn't realistic to install telephones in thousands of households. Apart from that, the installation fee alone wasn't affordable for ordinary people, not to mention the monthly rent and communication fees. The installation fee was 50 taels of silver, and the monthly rent was 1 tael of silver. The phone bill was 60 copper coins per 5 minutes, and it was counted as 5 minutes if it was less than 5 minutes. Rinpoche knew that this was the trend, and the future wasn't far away. It would be 20 to 30 years at most. However, for the time being, the main targets of telephones were the court and merchants. At the same time, there was also public telephones. Rinpoche was going to install public telephones throughout Dayo, including the Yun Nation and Tianjin Basin, and use them to collect copper coins. As for the cables needed to lay telephone lines, Rinpoche had made a lot of preparations for this. As early as a year ago, Rinpoche introduced a new coin, a copper-clad steel alloy coin, with a face value equivalent to 5 copper coins. Although countless steel rails were used to lay the railways, the price of steel was even higher than that of copper among the people. In addition, a new decree was issued that no one could refuse to accept the new coin, and those who were reported would be fined or whipped. Therefore, after a little chaos, this exquisite new coin was introduced. Taking this opportunity, Rinpoche collected a large number of copper coins from the market and smelted them into cables. However, there was still a large number of copper coins circulating in the market, and the price of copper coins even rose as he collected a large number of copper coins. Next, Rinpoche was going to use the coin-operated telephone to exchange the copper coins on the market for aluminum-magnesium alloy coins and completely replace the old coins with new coins. There was no other way. Compared to the lack of iron, there was a lack of copper. At present, the two largest copper mines were in Great Xia, and they were in the north. Rinpoche wasn't interested in Great Xia, and the location of those two mines determined that Dayo couldn't send troops to directly occupy them. As for the copper mines in the Yun Nation, the output was still insufficient for Rinpoche's needs, and the cables were currently the largest copper consumer. Rinpoche could only temporarily set his sights on the copper coins in the market to solve this urgent problem. After demonstrating the telephone to many officials in court, Rinpoche first gave each official a telephone in their residence, including the installation. Of course, they still had to pay the monthly rent and communication fees themselves. After that, under the Empress's instructions, the Ministry of Revenue directly ordered 1,000 telephones from Rinpoche's Royal Communications Company. With the exception of the Yun Nation, all the cities and most of the important departments in the entire Dayo region had telephones. Taking advantage of the Empress's order, Rinpoche ordered that every department in every city had to install a telephone. In reality, it was not a lot of money. In total, there were only about 3,000 telephones and a few 100,000 taels of silver. But he pushed the phone directly to the world. With this incident, Rinpoche felt that he and the Empress were the greatest examples of collusion between officials and businessmen. Of course, as soon as the order was given, apart from 2 yuan from the Ministry of Revenue, there was no response from the Yun Nation. However, no one would disrespect the Empress on this matter. Moreover, the importance of the telephone was unparalleled. Its importance and significance were no less than that of the tractor. In fact, they were even greater. Rinpoche had officially opened the door to the communication era. After the demonstration in the imperial court, Rinpoche got people to lay a telephone line from Lan City to the Yun Nation while he started to promote the project. At the same time, the recruits from Tianjin Basin were also undergoing intensive training. After recruiting a large number of laborers from Tianjin Basin to build the new city, Rinpoche finally began to make use of Tianjin Basin's manpower on a large scale. Between Lan City and Tianjin Basin, Rinpoche also built a new city. The so-called new city was nothing more than a stretch of brick houses and factories without even a fence. Of course, this was also the standard for future cities. Without walls, not only would it save a lot of manpower and material resources, but it would also facilitate expansion. At present, this new city was mainly responsible for the production of telephones and electric wires. Rubber was sent here from the Chen Nation, which saved about 700 to 800 kilometers compared to sending it to Lan City. Furthermore, Rinpoche was already preparing to build a new factory near the Protectorate of the Southeast that would be responsible for processing rubber. The mist is heavy today, and the country is deep here. The sound of the beach is more urgent than the autumn, and the air of the gorge is more cloudy. Looking at the watchtower, the clouds cover the eyes, and the heart is homesick with raindrops. How can I comfort my loneliness? I depend on the zither of the north. Overflowing with emotion, touching the heart. The sentences are neat and natural. I don't know who wrote this poem, but it's worthy of the name of a famous person. In a restaurant, a few scholars sat around a table, and one of them clapped his hands and praised. It's really not bad. It should be written by Zhao Prince Consort. He's not an aboriginal, so it's not surprising that he could write such a poem in a foreign land. He has a beauty in his arms and great power. I'm afraid he's enjoying it. Someone chuckled. A beauty in his arms? That's not necessarily the case. How could Her Majesty be a warm, fragrant, and soft jade? Someone looked around and chuckled. It's better not to talk about these things, an old man said while paying attention to his surroundings. If others heard about the emperor in private, they would immediately be in big trouble. I've long heard that Zhao Prince Consort is proficient in miscellaneous arts, but I didn't expect him to be proficient in poetry. The way of poetry only cultivates one's temperament and isn't beneficial to governing the country. Someone shook his head. What do you think about that telephone? Everyone was discussing a poem that had been circulating in the city recently. There was another sentence at the end of the poem. Homesickness? Make a call home. One poem, one sentence had brought this new thing, the telephone, directly to the front of everyone. This poem and this sentence were printed on a piece of paper with a picture of a telephone at the bottom. On the back of the paper was a brief introduction of the telephone, as well as the locations of the Royal Telephone Service offices in the various cities of the Yun Nation. As soon as this advertising flyer appeared, it immediately caused an uproar in the entire Yun Nation. It's really incredible to be able to use this to communicate from thousands of miles away. I wonder if it's true. Someone said, it can't be false. This matter has already spread throughout the Yun Nation. If it's false, then it will become a laughing stock. How could Zhao Prince Consort be so unwise? I heard that the city commander's residence has already ordered the installation of the telephone. Based on the time, it will be installed in 5 to 7 days. We will know the specifics when the time comes. If it's really as described on that piece of paper, this telephone is really amazing. In the future, no matter what happens anywhere, Lawn City will immediately know and orders will be issued. It's scary just thinking about it. You guys don't know, a young man said in a low voice. Do you think this kind of thing only exists? In fact, it has existed for a long time. I heard from my uncle that the city commander once went to the Protectorate of the Northeast for an urgent matter and received a reply within 15 minutes. A few days later, the city commander received the same decree. Even if we don't talk about this, you guys can study the movements of the troops from the Protectorate of the Northeast during the war a few years ago. Stop talking. Someone stopped him. It's useless to talk about this matter. It's not our place to discuss it. Be careful not to invite trouble. Brother Zhu, you're too careful. This matter can be detected as long as someone has the intention. Do you think you can stop the world from talking about it? The scholar said disapprovingly. However, this telephone is also good for us. In the future, if we go out to travel, it's very convenient to call home and ask about the recent situation. That's true. Traveling is just to increase one's knowledge. In the end, it still has to be sold to the imperial family. Now that the Yun Nation is gone and the examination is also gone, I don't know where we can go. Someone sighed. As soon as this was said, everyone immediately quieted down. Chapter 10:12. The Yun Nation had been gone for 6 years. In the past 6 years, these scholars have been greatly affected. It could be said that his entire fate had changed. They learned the arts and sold them to the Emperor's family, but where were they selling them to now? Until now, no one from the Yun Nation had become an official in the Imperial Court of Dayo, and there was no such thing as a major examination in Dayo. It could be said that their path had been blocked. It was also because of this that there were so many scholars who lingered in the brothels, leading a befuddled life. Some of those who were born in large clans were either looking for a way out in the current city magistrates' mansions or continuing their studies. Those whose family conditions were not good in the first place would simply become a shopkeeper for a merchant or go farming. Originally, the scholars still had some allowances from the imperial court, but now they could only make a living on their own. Although the people present were all of good backgrounds, when they thought of the current situation of those commoner scholars, they all felt sad. As for his own future, he had no idea what it would be like. It's a pity that the royal family of the Xia dynasty is in decline. Otherwise, we could go to the Xia dynasty to find a way out. Someone sighed. Even though they didn't want to leave their homes, if there was really no way out, Great Xia was also a place to go. Furthermore, the Yun Nation originated from Great Xia. It wasn't that the people of the Yun Nation couldn't accept returning to Great Xia. Unfortunately, the Great Xia dynasty was still at war, and the Great Xia dynasty was still in a weak position. Ever since the rebel army had food, they immediately won over the hearts of the people. It was said that in the territory occupied by the rebels, no one died of starvation. Just this alone was enough to tempt many commoners. The rebel army had food, but the imperial court did not. After a few years, the rebels had already occupied 2/3 of the territory, and the imperial court of the Great Xia dynasty was declining. Perhaps in a few years, even the imperial court of the Great Xia dynasty would no longer exist. Under such circumstances, how would the scholars of the Yun nation be willing to go to Great Xia? It could be said that even their last path had been cut off. A few years ago, the Yun nation was prosperous and Great Xia was at its peak. Emperor Xia Bailong, was bent on getting rid of Dayo. Who would have thought that a few years later, Xia Baicheng would die, the Great Xia dynasty would be in danger, and the Yun nation would lose its country. Dayo, which used to be backward and barbaric, was now flourishing. At this moment, no one in Dayo's imperial court cared about what the scholars from the Yun nation thought. Everyone's attention was drawn to the recently installed telephone. Ever since this thing was installed, if there was anything else, they didn't even need to send anyone. They could just make a phone call. Only then did everyone understand how much of an impact this thing would have on the future. Tong Xinye watched as the installation was completed. Without waiting for them to test it, he grabbed them and dialed the palace's number. "This is the royal family. Name." A man's rough voice came from the other end of the line. The imperial family was different from other families. They had to report their names before they would be transferred to His Majesty or someone else. Otherwise, if others knew the number of the royal family and called them every day, who could stand it? "I am Tong Xinye." Tong Xinye beamed with joy. He had already used this thing in the Ministry of Works, but it felt especially refreshing to install it in his own home. "Oh, it's Minister Tong. What's the matter?" "I'm just giving it a try." Tong Xinye chuckled and hung up the phone. The face of the operator on the other end of the line twitched. After hanging up the phone, Tong Xinye continued to call the Ministry of Works. Then, he called Shi Qing, Kozha Hai, Tu Wan, and Zhe Yin according to the paper pasted on the wall. Some of them got through, while others couldn't because the telephone hadn't been installed yet. After making one round of calls, Tong Xinye dialed Qin Chuan's number with a mischievous look on his face. The phone was picked up after ringing for a while. Qin Chuan's voice came from the other end of the line. This thing just rang. Did someone call?" "Idiot." Tong Xinye beamed with joy. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then, Qin Chuan's thunderous roar could be heard. "Ignorant Tong, how dare you call me?" In fact, Tong Xinye could hear Qin Chuan's voice clearly even after he hung up the phone. Their mansions weren't far apart, and they were only separated by the residence of the Ministry of Rights Minister. "Idiot son, bite me." Tong Xinye laughed heartily. "Ignorant old man, you're simply courting death. If I see you, I'll tear down that big dragon bone on your back and use it as a crutch." The big dragon bone referred to the spine, and the Aboriginals liked to call it the big dragon bone. "I didn't expect to hear your flustered and exasperated expression while I was drinking tea at home. Zheng Hong, give me some more tea." "Idiot, you can't see me, so what's the use of shouting?" Zhao Prince Consort has a good saying, "A dog that bites doesn't bark." "Ah, just you wait, ignorant old man. I'm going to teach you a lesson today." Tong Xinye heard the sound of something smashing on the other end of the line. He wondered if that old man had smashed the phone. In less than 30 breaths, an angry roar came from the top of the Tong residence. "Ignorant old man, come out now. I'm going to tear your mouth apart today." Tong Xinye looked out and saw Qin Chuan standing on the roof with a knife, looking for him. Needless to say, there was a routine fight. From that day onwards, Tong Xinye had another hobby. He would call Qin Chuan every night when he had nothing to do. The Xiong residence, which was situated between the Qin residence and the Tong residence, could be heard cursing at night from both sides. Even though they were using the phone, their cursing could be heard across half of Beihong district. Most of the cursing would end up in a brawl. After a few days, Xiong Yaohe cursed in court with dark circles under his eyes. In the end, the Empress gave both of them 50 strokes of the paddle each. She really gave both of them 50 strokes of the paddle, not one less. However, to the two of them, who had thick skin and flesh, 50 strokes of the paddle was no different from scratching an itch. The cursing continued every night. Then, The cursing turned into a three-person cursing. Now, it was the others who went to court with dark circles under their eyes. This farce continued until Tong Jinye and Qin Chuan were surrounded and beaten up by everyone. Before that, the Yun Nation had also opened a phone line. In Luoye City, in addition to the warlord, all the officials were gathered around a table in the middle. Is this the phone? It's such a big thing. What's this string for? It's said to transmit sound. Can this string transmit sound all the way to Lan City? Won't we know after we try? Wait a while. The city guard have installed one too. Let's try it after it's done. Since I'm going to ask if it's ready, the city guards will need another day to install it. Why don't we try somewhere else? All right. Shut up, the warlord said faintly. Then, he took out a small book from his pocket, flipped through a few pages, and turned the dial on the phone according to the numbers on it. Those with sharp eyes could see the words Dayo's address book written on it. After a while, a beeping sound came from the other end of the phone. The room immediately quieted down. Everyone pricked up their ears to see if this thing could really talk to people thousands of miles away. Who is it? When the other end of the phone was connected, everyone held their breath. The warlord was distracted for a moment, but the call was actually connected. Then, he immediately said, "Is this the residence of Sanjiang City's mayor?" "This is the residence of Sanjiang City's mayor." "Who are you?" "I'm Su Ping from Luoye City." "Is Brother Shin around?" "Warlord Su." "I'm sorry. I'll inform the warlord right away." The person on the other end of the phone was surprised at first, then hurriedly replied. Currently, there were two positions in the Yun Nation, the warlord and the mayor. The group that had surrendered back then had all kept their positions as city lords. Those who were promoted later on were called the mayor. Although they had the same authority as the warlord, whether they could sit in this position depended on the imperial court. At this moment, everyone in the room was surprised. They actually fought their way to Sanjiang City. Hearing about it was one thing, but seeing it with their own eyes was another. With this thing, even if they were separated by two places, they could still contact each other at will. Many people were thinking that they should also install one at home. Although 50 taels of silver wasn't a small amount, it wasn't much to them. Su Ping chatted with the Sanjiang City's mayor for a while. Both of them found this kind of conversation thousands of miles away very refreshing. After a while, Su Ping put down the phone and sighed. Zhao Prince Consort is really a celestial being. Thank you to Rolling Round for the tip. Thank you to Ergo Wa for the tip. Genius 1 second to remember this website's address. Mobile version. Chapter 10:13. As the telephones were gradually installed in the residences of the warlords of the Yun Nation, the originally vague veil over this new thing was finally lifted. There was no limit to the distance. They could talk at any time from hundreds of kilometers to thousands of kilometers away. They could clearly hear the other party's voice. The two warlords could even use it to chat about their daily lives. There was no need for the various departments to send people for anything. They only needed to make a phone call. Soon, everything about telephones swept through the entire Yun Nation like a storm. Whether it was on the streets or in the alleys, in the brothels or restaurants, people were discussing telephones. Coupled with the advertisement, "Make a phone call if you miss home," it was in the limelight for a while. Ren Baqian's reputation also rose, and the name Tiangong quickly replaced the original names Poison Warrior and Stinky King. Ren Baqian was happy to see this because he finally didn't have to carry those two names on his back anymore. The name Poison Warrior was fine, but the name Stinky King would occasionally reach his ears through the rearguard commandery, making him feel inexplicably sad every time. It was as if he had become a stink bug crossing the street. What followed was a large number of orders from the people. In particular, the families and chambers of commerce didn't have a problem with the high installation cost and monthly rent of the telephones. The benefits of timely communication were innumerable. In just half a month, more than 40 royal communication stores throughout the Yun Nation received more than 7,000 orders for the installation of telephones. A total of more than 40,000 telephones needed to be installed. On average, 6 telephones were installed for each order. Many chambers of commerce and families had installed one in each of the cities in their area of activity. This was 10 times the number of telephones installed in the Yun Nation's imperial court and cities. This showed the affluence of the people of the Yun Nation and their enthusiasm for telephones. With Rinpoche's current manpower, he could install more than 300 telephones a day. It would take more than 3 months to install more than 40,000 telephones. In addition to the installation of telephones in the southern cities of Dayo and Tianjin Basin, they would be fully booked for at least half a year. In addition to the public telephones that were expected to cover all of Dayo's cities, it was estimated that it would take at least another year. A month later, Rinpoche received a special telephone installation request. Your Highness, you can't possibly refuse such a small request, right? Don't forget that we are still partners. Qing Lian looked at Rinpoche with a smile. Well, she had read the term partner from a book that Rinpoche gave her. You want me to lay telephone lines in Great Xia? Rinpoche smiled faintly and asked, Do you know how much it costs to lay these cables? Qing Lian smiled at him and slowly said, Your Highness, you call that a telephone cable, right? His Royal Highness used 20 pairs of telephone cables, which required 1 kilograms of copper per kilometer, which contained 51% copper. In other words, 1 kilometer required 7 kilograms of copper and 4 kilograms of insulating material. The distance from Iron Suo Pass to Little Jade Capital is 2,400 kilometers, and we need to go to Longchuan, Jiangyin, Qibei, Duyao, Shandong, Shenglong, Shengqing, and Wu Road Pass. There are 8 routes, a total of 6,300 kilometers. Including the previous 2,400 kilometers, there was a total of 8,700 kilometers. Since the weight of a copper coin is 4 to 5 grams, we will count it as 5 grams. 1 tael of silver was equivalent to 1,200 copper, which was equivalent to 6 kilograms. I also roughly estimated the price of rubber. 1 kilogram wouldn't exceed 100 coppers, which is half the price of copper. Thus, excluding manpower, the cost of 1 kilometer was 2,180 copper coins. Based on the calculation of 2 taels of silver, the total cost would be 17,400 taels of silver. We can offer 200,000 taels of silver. Of course, I also know that this amount of silver isn't much to your Highness, but Great Xia is vast, and only you have the telephone technology. In the future, the entire Great Xia will have to rely on you in this aspect. These 8 routes are just the beginning, or it could be said that your Highness did it out of convenience. However, His Highness's convenience is of great use to us. All of us are extremely grateful to your Highness. Rinpoche looked at Qing Lian's confident face and felt that it was a pity that such a talent was wasted on fighting and killing. Scientific research should be her home. The Sea of Stars should be her goal. You should continue to study at the academy. Are those sword masters doing well here with your Highness? Qing Lian asked with a smile. After this is over, I might have to join them and seek shelter under your Highness. I do you a favor for this. I can't forget, so you don't have to remind me. Rinpoche knocked on the table. It's not that I can't agree to this. Rinpoche thought about whether he should take this opportunity to get them to give him a tax-free agreement to set up a telecommunications company in Great Xia in the future. Merchants in this world had to pay taxes, and the same was true for telecommunications companies. This was especially true in 10 to 20 years when everything in Great Xia was stable. Given the population of Great Xia, it wasn't impossible for a few intelligent people to imitate and research telephones and switchboards. There weren't any before, but no one thought of it. 10 to 20 years would be enough for them to study the principles based on the real thing. At that time, this agreement would give the Royal Telecommunications Company a great advantage in the market. However, after thinking about it carefully, it wasn't very meaningful for him to have these little ideas with these people. This wasn't Earth, and it wasn't a world where everything was linked to economics. His goals were to explore the foreign races outside of the land of exile and explore this world. Qing Lian looked at Rinpoche and waited for a moment before asking, "What other request do you have, Your Highness?" "Forget it. There's nothing else." However, it would not be possible in a short period of time. They did not have enough manpower. It should be at least a year later. Ren Baqian calculated the time in his mind. "Although I don't know what you were thinking about just now, I think that you gave up on a request that was beneficial to you." "Thank you very much, Your Highness." Qing Lian was very clever. Looking at Ren Baqian's expression, she could roughly guess some things, but didn't know the specifics. "You." Ren Baqian pointed at her and said, "It's good that you know it. Don't act like you've gotten something good." Qing Lian chuckled and said again, "I don't think the laying of the circuit is complicated, and we can complete most of it ourselves. You only need to send a small number of people to assist. I believe that you can still send such a small number of people." Once again, Ren Baqian felt that it was a pity for Qing Lian to follow those rebels to fight and kill. Even if such a talent wasn't sent to the research institute, she would still be a capable person in the imperial court. Currently, among the few students that he favored in the academy, none of them could compare to her in terms of knowledge or mind. What a pity. "That's settled then. I'll send 10 people to assist you." Ren Baqian nodded. "Thank you, Your Highness." Qing Lian didn't look happy even though this trip was a success. In fact, she had never worried about this matter. Therefore, after the negotiation, Qing Lian said, "Previously, it was official business. Now that it's done, I would like to congratulate Your Highness and the Empress of Dayo on the birth of a child." If it were anyone else, she would naturally try to get closer to them before talking about official business. In Qing Lian's mind, there was no need to do so. "I've obtained several ancient scrolls recently, and I've brought them with me as a congratulatory gift for the little princess." Ren Baqian subconsciously asked, "Did you dig up graves?" Qing Lian covered her mouth and chuckled. "Your Highness, you guessed it right. Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. No advertising words." Chapter 1014. Ren Baqian carefully flipped through the ancient scrolls on the table. They were all bound with animal skin, and he couldn't tell what kind of animal skin it was made of. After so many years, they still hadn't been damaged at all. With just one glance, Ren Baqian was sure that these scrolls came from an era without any records. The 2 records of the Earth Dragon were divided into 2 volumes, which mainly recorded some rare beasts, herbs, and ores. Only a few of these records were the same as the existing herbs and ores, and most of them were extremely rare and precious. The first was Records of the Water Dragon, which was similar to the Records of the Earth Dragon, but the former was for land, while the latter was for water. The last was Using Water to Bathe the Eyes, which seemed to be a special method for training the eyes. The few types of water that were needed were all recorded in Records of the Water Dragon. The name was simple, but the effect was great. It was said that after mastering it, one's eyesight could reach up to 1,000 miles, which was considered powerful. For the people of this world, the ability to see up to 1,000 miles was a fairly powerful training method. However, with binoculars, this method wasn't very meaningful. What was really important were the 2 records of the Earth Dragon and Records of the Water Dragon. Not only did they record the killers, herbs, and ores of the outside world, but there was also a small part of the water and mountain range map. It was of great significance for sending people to the outside world to find a hiding place to train. The previous phone call was only worth 200,000 taels of silver, but the value of these 3 books couldn't be measured with money. Where was the grave found? What's the situation inside? What else is there besides these? Ren Baqian asked seriously. Under the ancestral grave of a rich family, there was a simple stone room. Apart from these ancient scrolls, there was only a skeleton. I also got someone to bury the skeleton properly. Qing Lian smiled and said, "I knew that you would be interested." "You knew?" Ren Baqian asked. Ma Hongyu of the Empire, Su Gongso of the Sun and Moon in the Palm, Lin Dong of the Jingtian sect, and Gao Yi of the Spear. These famous experts have been very active recently. Qing Lian pursed her lips. Ren Baqian nodded slightly. The rebel army was now more powerful than the imperial court of Great Xia, and the movements of these experts inevitably reached their ears. Thank you very much. If there are similar things in the future, Rinpoche wanted to say that as long as he could afford it, he felt that it was too much. Got it. These things are useless in our hands. Besides, I'm also very curious about some things. If your Highness acts quickly, I might be able to see them in my lifetime. Qing Mian's expression finally changed a little when she said this. There was some anticipation, but there was also some sadness. Even if it was an ordinary person, after becoming a sword master, they could still become an expert. But the price was too heavy. They couldn't cultivate, and their lifespans were shorter than ordinary people. The lifespan of a sword master was usually only 60 or 70 years old. If they didn't fight often and had the support of resources, they might be able to live to 80 or 90 years old. This was their limit. Qing Mian was already 27 or 28 years old. If there were no accidents, she would only have 40 to 50 years left to live. This was why she said that if he moved quickly, she might be able to see him. With her intelligence, she was able to obtain a lot of information from the Water Dragon record and Earth Dragon record, combined with the movements of Ma Hongyu and the others. Even if she couldn't guess the whole picture, she could at least guess half of it. The advent of the telephone had brought about a storm that swept through the Yun nation, and it was getting more and more intense. According to this era, the function of the telephone was comparable to that of a magical artifact. However, compared to those strange legends, the telephone was something that many people could come into contact with. Whether it was families, chambers of commerce, various departments in every city, or even many wealthy households, they began to plan whether or not to install a telephone at home, even though there wasn't a need for it for the time being. Most people in this era still lived in their own land, and ordinary people couldn't even walk out of a radius of 50 kilometers. However, it was a worthwhile deal to show off and earn some face with a few dozen taels of silver. As a result, the craze brought about by the telephone never subsided. This craze also played a great role in the promotion of the telephone. Even if there was no need for any more publicity, the number of telephone users would steadily increase. While the craze for the telephone was still ongoing, a new product appeared in front of everyone. It was a cargo truck. It looked like a Jiefeng 141, but its performance was only equivalent to that of a standard World War II truck. It weighed 4,000 kilograms and carried 6,000 kilograms, which was slightly lower than a tractor. Furthermore, it had much higher requirements for roads than a tractor. With the exception of going up mountains and down to the sea, the tractor had excellent traffic performance in most places, which was something that a truck couldn't achieve. This was also the reason why Rinpoche brought out a tractor, as it was much more practical than a truck. It was expensive, had a low carrying capacity, and had high requirements for roads. Despite having so many flaws, one advantage overshadowed all of them: speed. It was twice as fast as a tractor and could reach 240 kilometers per hour, which was equivalent to 60 kilometers per hour. It would take 10 to 15 days to travel from Lan City to Pingdu with an ox cart, 3 days with a tractor, and 1.5 days with a truck. This alone attracted the attention of many merchants in the Yun nation. Furthermore, this new product called a truck was much more comfortable to ride than a tractor. At least it had a driver's compartment that could shelter people from the wind and rain. Furthermore, it was more stable and not as bumpy as a tractor, which made people want to vomit. 2,000 of these trucks were ordered as soon as they were launched. Many people were even prepared to use this thing as a daily means of transportation. The only thing that limited the popularization of this truck was the roads. However, there was another piece of news that appeared along with the truck. It was to recruit more than 1 million laborers from the Yun nation to build roads there. With the daily flow of caravans on the road from Lan City to the Yun nation, a large number of materials were transported to both places. Lan City was becoming increasingly prosperous, and the prices were much lower than before. The proportion of the revenue from commercial taxes in the national treasury was increasing. Even Tu Wan, who was a stingy person, agreed with Rinpoche, saying, "If you want to get rich, build roads first." There was another saying that Rinpoche always said, "Have more children and plant fewer trees." Furthermore, with the salt and iron mines returned to the imperial court and the revenue from the Department of Commerce, the National Treasury's revenue had increased several times compared to before. The batch of gold and silver that was plundered from a U-nation back then was still in the National Treasury. Not only did it not decrease, but it was also increasing. As a result, there was no resistance in the imperial court to recruit laborers to build roads this time. It only took 3 days from the proposal to the agreement. The decree was passed down to all the cities in the U-nation. City Commander, get ready. A decree has arrived. The city commander of Sanha City was resting in his residence. When he heard the report, he hurriedly put on his clothes and ran out. When he arrived at the city commander's residence, he saw 3 aboriginal men dressed as soldiers. "I'm Long Yuawu, the city commander of the city. Are the 3 of you here to deliver the decree? You are the city commander. Receive it." One of the burly men took out a roll of paper from his bag and stuffed it into Long Yuawu's hand. "The decree has arrived. We will leave now." The 3 of them didn't wait for his reply. It seemed that they didn't even consider that he would refuse this decree and were about to leave after delivering the paper. "If you have nothing important to do, why don't you rest in this city for a while?" Long Yuawu quickly asked. "I don't have the time. I still have to go to other cities." The 3 burly men didn't give him any face and turned to leave. Long Yuawu was moved. He didn't know why they still had to go to other cities. "These barbarians are very unreasonable," a young scholar said as he walked out from behind the door. "Don't let me hear the word barbarian ever again," Long Yuawu said unhappily. The scholar's expression changed slightly as he lowered his head and said, "It's a slip of the tongue. Furthermore, it might not be a bad thing for them to be like this," Long Yuawu added. Regardless of whether it was delivering a decree or something else, the news was delivered without any sloppiness. It wasn't like the U-nation, where if there was an envoy from the imperial court, they would not only receive him extravagantly, but they would also send gifts. Previously, he had been forced to become the city commander because he wanted to ensure the survival of the people in this city. As for what it felt like to be the city commander, he simply didn't dare to think too much about it. He didn't expect that after a few years, his position as the city commander would be so stable. Furthermore, the Aboriginals wouldn't give him any trouble. It wasn't as chaotic as the U-nation, which saved him a lot of trouble. As such, he really liked the Aboriginal style. Long Yuawu opened the scroll and glanced at it. His expression changed slightly. "Sir, what's the matter?" This time, the imperial court wants to recruit 1 million laborers to build the official road. 1 million laborers? The scholar was also moved. "That's right. Our city needs 28,000 laborers," Long Yuawu said in a deep voice. The 2 of them weren't surprised by the number, but by the fact that it was actually labor and not corvée labor. One had to know that corvée labor didn't get paid. In previous years, corvée labor was used to build roads and cities. On the other hand, labor had to be paid. "Everyone gets 1 tael of silver a month," Long Yuawu said again. It wasn't a little, but a lot. This was already the normal income of an ordinary citizen. Some of the poorer ones didn't even have this income. One had to know that this was labor, and every city had to provide a sufficient number of people. It was a little mandatory, and even 800 copper coins as a salary was a lot. 1 tael of silver as a salary and food was included. This treatment was simply generous. That was why the 2 of them were surprised. Long Yuawu had mixed feelings in his heart. When he took office as the city commander, he was prepared to be criticized in the back. In the end, after the Aboriginals conquered the U-nation, not only did they not exploit him, but they also used conciliatory methods. Since they were conciliatory, there was no need for him to say or do much. He just had to follow the imperial court's orders. After a few years, he had gained some reputation. Long Yuawu thought about the U-nation's emperor, who had favored Prime Minister Xenyong, and the Prime Minister, who had eliminated dissidents in the face of a great enemy, and he had mixed feelings. Long Yu rolled up the scroll and held it in his hand before instructing the scholar. Go and summon the chief librarian and Minister Sima. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 10:15. The recruitment of laborers went smoothly. The imperial court forcefully allocated the number of laborers to each city. There were more than 400 cities, and the smaller cities had to send more than 10,000 people, while the bigger cities had to send 30,000 to 40,000 people. Although it would have a little impact on the cities, it wasn't a big deal. The Yu nation also had a population of nearly 100 million. This wasn't like sending able-bodied men to war. The wages were sufficient, and there wasn't much backlash from the people. On the contrary, the wages were too generous, and many people doubted whether they could really get it. As for the other classes, such as scholars, wealthy families, and merchants, they were happy to see this happen and were even looking forward to it. After all, after walking the road from Lan City to Pingdu, the road to the Yu nation was no different from a country road. In just 20 days, millions of laborers were recruited to start building the road to the Yu nation. The first was the road from Pingdu to Wangjing. After it was repaired, it would only take 2 days for tractors and 1 day for trucks to travel from Pingdu to Wangjing. In other words, with trucks, fresh seafood from the sea could be delivered to Lan City in 2.5 days. For the people of Dayo who had a hard time eating, this was an excellent thing. After all, as far as Rinpoche knew, there was kelp in this world, but the fishermen of the Yun nation didn't eat it. The various resources in the sea were also extremely rich. At present, the ingredients in the sea were what Rinpoche cared about the most. This was because he wanted to expand the planting area of soybeans and other oil crops that were used as raw materials for biodiesel. This would reduce the farming and grazing area in Dayo, which wasn't considered rich. In this case, the sea was an excellent source of food. Shaojiang Academy. The sound of people reading echoed in the academy. The sound of students reading had always been Ning Changqing's favorite. At this time, Ning Changqing, who was nearly 70 years old, was sitting in the courtyard with his eyes closed. He was listening to his favorite reading, but his eyebrows were furrowed. Dean, we can't go on like this. Sitting not far away from him was a scholarly scholar who was about 50 years old. OL, Amos replied softly, his eyes still closed. Shaojiang Academy was one of the top 5 academies in the Yun nation. For hundreds of years, there had been many important officials from the academy. There were 2 prime ministers. There were countless officials, big and small. Ever since the establishment of the Shaojiang Academy, it had emphasized a good country should not nurture talents first. A way to nurture talents should not first encourage them to learn. When students entered the academy, they would be enrolled in different subjects according to their specialties. The curriculum advocated practical application and field investigation, which was called understanding and applying. Furthermore, he proposed, it is necessary to teach the economic industry and obtain economic talents. It was very compatible with the strong business atmosphere of the Yun nation. Thus, although Shaojiang Academy was one of the 5 great academies, it was one of the 2 most famous academies. As for the most famous one, it was the Wangjing Academy, which was based on the study of scriptures. But in terms of students, Shaojiang Academy was the best at practical work. In fact, in the eyes of many, the Shaojiang Academy was the leader of the 5 great academies. Logically speaking, with such a famous Shaojiang Academy, there shouldn't be anything for the old dean to worry about. That was how it had always been. However, a few years ago, the Yun nation had fallen, and the emperor had been captured. Everything had changed overnight. From then on, Ning Changqing always frowned. Especially in the past 2 years, Ning Changqing's frown had become more frequent, and he had also become more and more aged. When the others saw this, they naturally knew it wasn't easy. However, they had to think of a way. Ever since the fall of the Yun nation, it had been a few years since a student had become an official. There were no examinations in Dayo and the Yun nation. It could be said that the future of the students had been cut off. In the past, the students in the academy wouldn't even take a second look at the merchants. But now, when students from ordinary families left the academy, most of them went to work for merchants. What did the teachers in the academy think of this? Not to mention that the number of students in the past 2 years was only half of what it used to be. Many of the teachers in the academy were anxious when they saw this. Another scholar sighed. He knew that it was useless to look for the old dean in today's world. The Aboriginals only cared about their fists and didn't care about knowledge. Most of the time, he just wanted to vent his frustration. In fact, there is a way. Enchanting suddenly opened his eyes. However, after saying this, he shook his head and closed his eyes again. Let's wait. The scholar laughed bitterly. Indeed, they could only wait. If there was a change of dynasty, the new emperor would definitely hold a major examination to fill in a large number of officials. In addition, holding a major examination would signify the end of everything and the beginning of a new dynasty. It was also intended to rope in the scholars and stop them from gossiping. It wasn't that the Dayo imperial court didn't lack officials. On the contrary, it was extremely lacking. It was just that the fierce Aboriginals had no intention of roping in the scholars. As a result, these scholars were at a loss. Not to mention whether they were willing to work for the Aboriginals or not. They didn't even have the opportunity to work for the Aboriginals. The Aboriginals didn't seem to care about them at all. However, looking at the Aboriginals' conciliatory behavior, they would rope in the scholars of the Yun Nation sooner or later. They just had to wait. At the thought of this, the scholar felt extremely complicated. On one hand, Dayo was their enemy. On the other hand, the Yun Nation was now under Dayo's rule. On the contrary, it wasn't as chaotic as before, and the people were living a better life than before. Just like the conscription in the past few days. If the Yun Nation was still in power, they would probably become forced labor and end up in misery. Furthermore, the behavior of the Aboriginals in the past 2 years was completely different from the fierce and overbearing Aboriginals of the past. The two of them sat in the courtyard, each thinking of their own thoughts. At this moment, an old man rushed in and said, "Dean, something has happened. What's the matter?" Enchanting opened his eyes. "Don't worry, speak slowly." Enchanting's eyes weren't muddy like an old man's. Instead, they were clear and intelligent. The old man took a deep breath and said, "A few Aboriginal soldiers are at the door and want to see you, Dean." Enchanting knocked on the armrest of the chair twice, stood up, and walked out. "Dean, should we inform the others?" The scholar got up and followed behind him with a worried look. He didn't know what the Aboriginal soldiers were here for. "Don't alarm the others." Enchanting waved his hand. It might not be a bad thing. A moment later, Enchanting arrived at the entrance of the academy. The old man didn't know the purpose of their visit and hurriedly ran to the academy to report the news before leaving them outside. Fortunately, they didn't look impatient. "Gentlemen, I'm the dean here. Sorry for the delay. Please come in and talk." "There's no need. We'll give you the letter. We'll leave after you reply," said a woman in her 20s who was wearing armor. She took out a letter from her bosom and handed it to Enchanting. "Gentlemen, please wait for a moment." Enchanting took the letter unhurriedly and opened it. He frowned, frowned, and relaxed again. The scholar beside him looked at his frown and felt like pressing his fingers to smooth it out. "Please report to Zhao Prince Consort that I will bring the students of the academy for an exchange." "Got it." The person turned and left. After the other person left, the middle-aged scholar asked, "Dean, what kind of exchange?" Enchanting's frown finally widened. "Didn't I tell you to wait?" "You've waited." Enchanting continued. Zhao Prince Consort invited the students of the academy to visit Black Bamboo College for an exchange. That's what the letter said. Chapter 1016. Black Bamboo Academy. I heard that it was founded by Zhao Prince Consort and supported by him alone. Apart from him, there's only Lin Mengsheng, the scholar said with a strange tone. A single person supporting an entire academy? And a few hundred students? He wondered what kind of students he could teach. It sounded more like a private school in a village. Oh, there were 2 students now, and they had been upgraded to a private school in town. In fact, this was the only academy in the Aboriginals' territory. An exchange visit. They didn't know what was there to exchange. Of course, the purpose of this letter wasn't to communicate. No matter what, it's a good thing, the scholar murmured. He wanted to let the Aboriginals see the ability of the academy students and let them understand the difference between a village private school and the 5 big academies. It could also give the academy students a better future. As for whether the students were willing to work for the Aboriginals, he wasn't too worried. Xiaojiang Academy was different from Wangjing Academy. It focused on practicality, unlike Wangjing Academy that focused on the study of scriptures. If it were Wangjing Academy, they would probably hesitate and even spit at this kind of thing. However, Xiaojiang Academy wouldn't. Now that it was ruled by the Aboriginals, they could only put their knowledge to good use and benefit the people of the Yun Nation if they entered that system. How many students should I bring? The scholar began to calculate the most promising students in the academy. I didn't say how many. Too many wouldn't be appropriate, and too few would make us look weak. After all, it's an exchange, so let's set it at 20. Ning Changqing said. He naturally realized that the scholar was looking down on Black Bamboo Academy just now. However, he didn't think it was that simple. Zhao Prince Consort wasn't simple, not to mention the tractors, trucks, glass, silver mirrors, and noisy phone calls. In just 1 year, he had pacified Tianjin Basin and sent those people to the Yun Nation. They had played a great role in the war between Dayo and the Yun Nation. This wasn't something an ordinary person could do. Although he was a prince consort, it was one thing for the Empress to fall in love with him, but it was another for the people in Dayo's imperial court to agree with him. From the policies of the Aboriginals in the Yun Nation, his shadow could be seen everywhere. Just these 2 points alone were enough to show his talent. In the past, Black Bamboo Academy relied on him alone. Later on, there were only 2 of them, including Lin Mengsheng. It was impossible for the 2 of them to teach hundreds of students. Moreover, he heard that there were more than a few hundred students in Black Bamboo Academy. There were a total of 6 grades and thousands of students. He really didn't know if he had a doppelganger technique. Otherwise, how could he teach so many students? After thinking about it, Ning Changqing decided to keep his doubts to himself. In any case, he would be able to see what the students of the Black Bamboo Academy were like in a few days. Dean, they didn't just invite us this time, right? Could there be Wangjing Academy and Jiangling Academy as well? The scholar suddenly thought of something. If that's the case, I'm afraid we'll have to communicate with them. The scholar emphasized the word communication. In the past, when the 5 academies met, there would often be competitions. Everyone wanted to suppress the other. Furthermore, they were in Lan City, in front of the entire imperial court of Dayo. In the past, they were all in the Yun Nation and knew each other very well. It didn't affect them much even if they won or lost. However, it was different this time. Whichever academy could suppress the others would immediately enter the eyes of the imperial court of Dayo. The academies would also be more valued in the eyes of the imperial court of Dayo. In the future, the students of the academies would also be looked up to. This time, it was much more important than those previous exchanges. Not to mention the possibility of accepting the children of some important Aboriginal officials to study in the academies. Ning Changqing frowned. He understood what the scholar was thinking. After thinking for a while, he sighed. Go and inform the students to see who wants to go. Shui Yuan Pei Ma Hualong and Chao Gue want to go. Yes. The scholar left with a smile on his face. These 3 students were the most outstanding students in the academy in recent years. Each of them was a talent for governing the world. This scene didn't only happen in Xiaojiang Academy, but also in several other academies. Every academy that received the invitation understood the importance of the exchange at Black Bamboo Academy. Therefore, they sent their most outstanding students to prepare for a good exchange with the other academies. As for the original owner of Black Bamboo Academy, they just had to find a place and watch over it. Not many people thought that an academy with only 2 people could produce outstanding students. Even though most people knew that Zhao Prince Consort was a talented man, they still couldn't accept it. Lin Mengsheng couldn't be underestimated either. However, there were only two of them. Which of the 5 major academies didn't have dozens of teachers? Which of them didn't have some talent? After a while, they would find out that it wasn't just the 5 major academies that were invited. Instead, all 23 famous academies in the Yun Nation were invited. However, in their hearts, their opponents were still the other 4 academies. The other academies were just spectators. While many of the academies in the Yun Nation were preparing, Ren Baqian simply said to the students, "There will be a group of students from the Yun Nation coming for an exchange in a month." He then returned to Earth with Honeysuckle. They were going back to watch the Olympics. This was the first time that man-wheel experts were allowed to participate in the Olympics. Although martial arts had been spread on Earth for 20 years, the previous Olympic Games were still attended by ordinary athletes. Of course, it wasn't right to say that they were ordinary athletes. In fact, there had been great changes in the previous Olympic Games, but they were still limited to those below the man-wheel level. There was a huge gap between the man-wheel and those below the man-wheel level. Now, this restriction had finally been lifted. It was estimated that there would be a large number of man-wheel athletes participating in this year's Olympics. Therefore, Ren Baqian was still very interested. Not only him, but everyone on Earth was also full of expectations. After all, martial arts had entered everyone's lives, whether it was in China or abroad. Everyone was paying attention to the amazing strength that the man-wheel experts would display when they appeared in the competition. Ren Baqian put Honeysuckle aside and told her not to break the window. Then, he called his assistant over and asked, "Has everything been arranged?" "Yes, as long as you arrive at the competition venue. You can watch any of the VIP seats for all the events." Ren Baqian nodded. Although the Olympic Games had a 14-day schedule, he could only watch for 7 days at most. 7 days was enough. All he had to do was read something he was interested in. Chapter 10:17. "Father, where are we going?" Honeysuckle sat beside Ren Baqian and looked out the window at the scenery outside with a happy face. The scenery on Earth and Lawn City were very different. The tall buildings, the colorful colors, the rolling traffic, and the sea of people all excited her. She felt that this place was much more interesting than the palace. She just didn't know why her father and mother didn't live here. To see something interesting, Ren Baqian rubbed Honeysuckle's head. After a while, he suddenly asked, "Honeysuckle, do you want to go to school?" "Go to school? What is that?" Honeysuckle turned her head and looked at her father doubtfully. "It's to learn and grow with many children," Ren Baqian said thoughtfully. "Is it fun?" Honeysuckle still couldn't imagine what it would be like to study with many children. In her past, other than the occasional visits to her home at a very high place and the occasional trips to the streets by her father, all her other memories were in the palace. Maybe. Ren Baqian looked at the passing scenery outside the window with a thoughtful look in his eyes. He was wondering if it was time to find a kindergarten for Honeysuckle. Although Honeysuckle's intelligence grew faster than that of ordinary children, the growth of intelligence also required sufficient experience as a foundation. Honeysuckle's current intelligence and learning ability were comparable to that of a 7 or 8-year-old child. However, she played in the palace every day and came into contact with the people there, so her intelligence wasn't as high as it actually was. At most, she was at the level of a 4 or 5-year-old child. In particular, she was too unfamiliar with many things in the outside world and couldn't even compare to ordinary children. Although she could be educated in the palace, it was better to let her see and interact with things in person than to rely on books to broaden her horizons. Therefore, Ren Baqian considered letting her go to kindergarten. The locations were Earth and Dayo. In Dayo, he could open a kindergarten and let Honeysuckle come into contact with more children of officials and commoners. However, the things she came into contact with on Earth were completely different. With the learning experience on Earth, her horizons and thoughts were completely different, so she had to go to kindergarten on Earth. Not only kindergarten, but elementary school, middle school, high school, and even university, Rinpoche was prepared to let her go. As for the time, it was easier to arrange. 5 days in Dayo and 5 days on Earth were perfectly staggered with weekends. Other people's children went to school 5 days a week, but Two-Flower was better. He went to school 10 days a week. There were two problems. Firstly, Honeysuckle was 3 meters tall. No matter how you looked at her, she looked like a 7 or 8-year-old child. She didn't look like a kindergartner. If she entered kindergarten, she would really be outstanding and like a crane among chickens. Moreover, her muscles looked rather strange to the others. The other thing was her control over her power. In the palace, even the roaring emperor and the golden-haired man, whom she trampled on every day, were at the man-wheel level. As for the children in the kindergarten, if she couldn't control her own strength, something bad would really happen. It seems like I have to teach her how to control her power first. Rinpoche thought to himself. She had been doing this since she was born, but the effect was sometimes good and sometimes bad. Every once in a while, she would be able to absorb a portion of the essence that she had obtained from the Empress and stored her body. As a result, her strength would increase a little. After that, he needed to get used to his new strength. Now, her strength had grown from the strength of 1,500 kilograms when she was born to more than 2,500 kilograms, which was a little higher than his own strength. However, she hadn't been trained in the use of her strength, and her punch didn't even have the force of 2,500 kilograms. One had to know that an Earth Wheel expert's punch could have 4 to 6 times the force of impact. This wasn't just the strength of the hands, but also the strength of the legs, waist, and the body. The explosive force of a Cardinal Heaven expert was even stronger and could reach more than 10 times the force of impact. This was the difference between having martial arts and not, and between a Cardinal Heaven expert and a Cardinal Heaven expert. This was why a Cardinal Heaven expert could cause so much damage. This was also why a Cardinal Heaven expert was so much stronger than an Earth Wheel expert. According to normal strength, a Cardinal Heaven expert would generally have the strength of 3 to 4,000 kilograms, and an Earth Wheel expert would have the strength of 1,000 kilograms. In reality, the difference was like heaven and earth. Even so, her destructive power couldn't be underestimated. One had to know that she was only 3 years old. 2,500 kilograms of force was enough for her to demolish houses, kindergartens, schools, and most of the living things on Earth. While Rinpoche was thinking, the car began to slow down. Looking out of the window, there was a turbulent flow of cars and people. They were nearing the stadium. There were many single-person aircraft in the air, and they were all responsible for maintaining order and guiding the people. Nowadays, many countries had introduced policies to limit the height of single-person aircraft. However, China's air traffic control had never been lax, and only certain functional departments could use it. Outside the window, a large number of people waving national flags were walking on the streets. Waves of singing came from their mouths, and everyone had a smile on their faces. The 2048 Olympic Games would be held in Shanghai. There was only one reason why the Olympic Games would be held in Shanghai. Some people did it on purpose. First, it was because the strength of the man-wheel participants was very high for the organizers. If the organizers were too weak, they wouldn't be able to suppress thousands of man-wheel participants, and it would be easy to cause trouble. China, which had a large population and a large number of experts, was naturally the best choice. The second reason was that some people wanted to see if there would be any trouble. Therefore, 10 years ago, it was decided that Shanghai would host the Olympic Games. A few years ago, it was also decided that the strength of the participants for this Olympic Games would be restricted to the man-wheel level. It was hard to say how much of this was done with bad intentions. However, the Chinese officials were also very confident in hosting the Olympic Games. At least so far, there hadn't been any trouble after the opening ceremony. Even if someone didn't open their eyes, they would be quickly suppressed by the powerful power of the Chinese government. As far as Rinpoche knew, 8 of the more than 10 Earth Wheel experts have been sent here. Father, they seem to be very happy. Honeysuckle leaned against the window and looked outside with envy on his face. She also wanted to be like those people walking in the crowd, singing and drinking together. This was more important. It was much more interesting than sitting in the car. Rinpoche touched her head again and didn't answer. Fortunately, the journey wasn't too long, and they soon arrived at their destination. Rinpoche brought Nianhua to a private room under the guidance of his assistant. The private room was semi-open. Brother, uncle. In the private room next door were Ren Wanyin and Ren Xia. There were also a few people they didn't know. They weren't sure if they were the executives or clients of Ren Wanyin's company. Ren Wanyin was 48 years old at the moment. Ren Xia was already 15 years old. He looked like a rather handsome youth and was full of vigor. Ren Xia is more handsome than you. Ren Bachin smiled at everyone. The pupil has surpassed the master. Ren Wanyin laughed calmly. When he looked at his son, his eyes were filled with indescribable affection. This son of his did not let him down. He didn't have too many bad habits like rich kids, and his only shortcoming was that he was more extravagant. However, extravagance wasn't a shortcoming for him. He had a straightforward and amiable personality, studied hard, and was talented in cultivation. Now, he was only one step away from the manual level. This was considered pretty good among the younger generation. However, he couldn't compare to his brother's little princess. He couldn't compare to her, and no one could. Father. Nianhua pointed at herself and smiled happily at Ren Wanyin and Ren Xia. Ren Bachin swung his hand and slapped the back of her head. What's your name? Nianhua immediately felt wronged. Nianhua. Uffed. The people in the private room next door who didn't know her immediately burst into laughter. Ren Bachin's face darkened, and he felt a little embarrassed. What's your name? Nianhua looked back at her father with tears in her eyes. After a while, she felt wronged and said, Can I call you Yuqing? Baidu search 881 Chinese network yen. No advertising slogan. Chapter 1018. It wasn't shameful for his daughter to be called Heir Hua. At most, it was a little rustic. Who didn't have a nickname like Gooden? However, it was rather awkward for the eldest princess of a country to be called Heir Hua. Furthermore, she was the eldest princess of a huge empire that was 2/3 the size of China. However, Ren Bachin quickly put this matter aside. Ren Wanyin eagerly introduced the other people in the room to Ren Bachin. They were all famous entrepreneurs, and also his business partners. Of course, Ren Bachin didn't know any of them. He just nodded kindly as a sign of his goodwill. He was more familiar with Chief Ma, Second Ma, Face Blind Dong, and the pig farm owner. However, those people had long retired, and the grass on their graves was already 3 meters tall. No one could resist the baptism of time. However, in the eyes of others, Ren Bachin was an exception. After a few decades, he didn't seem to have changed much. In the eyes of the higher-ups of the country, even though they were envious, they knew the reason. In the eyes of others, looking at Ren Bachin, whose appearance hadn't changed much, was like looking at a strange person. For example, some of Ren Wanyin's business partners knew that he had an elder brother who wasn't a simple person. However, at this moment, he looked more than 10 years younger than Ren Wanyin and had the appearance of a young man. Even those who didn't know him would know that he wasn't a simple person just by looking at him. It wasn't just because of his fierce appearance or young look. It was because of his imposing manner, which couldn't be developed unless he was in a high position and held great power. Ren Bachin kindly nodded to everyone and returned to his seat with Heir Hua. Father, there are so many people down there. Can we sit there? Heir Hua sat on the chair as if there were nails under her, but she couldn't sit still for a moment and kept moving around. She was wearing a white undergarment with a blue chiffon dress and a single ponytail. The clothes were quite old-fashioned and didn't stand out on her at all. Instead, it was very harmonious, as if she was supposed to wear it this way. Moreover, with the emergence of cultivation methods, there were more and more people dressed in Han clothing in recent years. Therefore, people would not find her clothes strange. However, Her personality was like a monkey's. According to Rinpoche, she was hyperactive. Just call me father outside. Rinpoche rubbed her head. Father. Erhua always felt that father was a very noble title. His father was his father, so he had to listen to him. In the future, he must let others call him dad, and let them listen to him. Honeysuckle was still young, but his mind was filled with a lot of things. It was filled with the imagination of a child his age. Erhua rolled his eyes and saw the bottle on the table. His face was filled with envy as he thought, wine. He asked, Father, can I drink it? If others were to see her like that, they would definitely feel pity for her. Such a young lady had to be so careful even when drinking juice. Her upbringing was too strict. However, no one could imagine her glorious history of sneaking out to a restaurant and drinking with others. The bamboo stir-fried meat didn't make her feel anything, but the three-character classic really scared her. He stayed in the palace for at least 3 days before he tried to sneak out again. Unfortunately, he failed and was punished to copy the three-character classic 50 times. This time, he had a better memory and behaved himself for 4 days. Not long after, the private room on the other side was also filled with 6 or 7 people. Someone greeted Ren Wanyin and even chatted with him. During this time, Ren Wanyin naturally introduced him as his elder brother. The other party was a man in his 30s or 40s. After thinking for a long time, he still couldn't figure out who Rinpoche was. However, the fact that Rinpoche was sitting in a private room instead of Ren Wanyin's was enough to show that he wasn't a simple person. One had to know that a private room for a popular event like the Olympic Games couldn't be booked even with money. Rinpoche greeted him perfunctorily. He wasn't interested in socializing with these people and couldn't even be bothered to remember their names. In another 10 years, there would be a new group of people. This person is quite arrogant. Another young man in the private room saw his perfunctory expression and laughed softly. I wonder which deity he is. Director Liu, you are being looked down upon. The person called Director Liu was the one who greeted Ren Wanyin earlier. His expression didn't change, and he just patted Ren Wanyin's arm before sitting down indifferently. That young man chuckled. He looked indifferent, but it seemed like he was angry at being looked down upon. He had quite a bit of strength in his hands. One had to know that Director Liu was a rising star in the country in the past 10 years. He wasn't old, but he was the boss of a high-tech company. His net worth wasn't low, and he had a lot of followers in the industry. His weakness was that he wasn't very tolerant. However, the other party was Ren Wanyin's relative, so Director Liu probably didn't dare to make an enemy and could only swallow his anger. One had to know that Ren Wanyin wasn't just a rising star, but a giant of the new generation. With a smile in his eyes, the young man turned his head and saw Honeysuckle leaning against the glass fence and looking down. With a look of longing, he smiled and asked, "Little girl, what's your name?" When Honeysuckle heard the voice, she turned her head in confusion. The other party asked again. Honeysuckle turned her head and saw that her father wasn't looking at her. Then, she stood up proudly and pointed to herself. "Father." The young man's expression suddenly froze. He looked at Honeysuckle playfully and pointed behind her. "Your father is over there." Honeysuckle stubbornly pointed to herself and said, "Call me father." This time, the young man finally confirmed that he wasn't mistaken. He felt a little awkward, but he couldn't argue with such a young child, so he could only turn his head away. The people nearby all chuckled when they saw this. The young man and Director Liu were both wondering who Ren Wanyin's biological brother was. Soon, the match was about to begin. It was the first round of the women's table tennis singles group stage. As the match time approached, the audience in the arena began to spontaneously wave the national flag and sing the national anthem. Honeysuckle listened attentively. When it was the second round, she immediately jumped onto the table and sang along. She loved this kind of excitement. Honeysuckle's first voice stunned most of the people in the spectator stand. Her voice was loud, too loud. If one had to describe it, it would be like the roar of a legendary dragon. One person could drown out the voices of hundreds of people. Those who were close to her couldn't hear anything except her voice. They all turned their heads and looked at her in shock. The young man who had spoken to her before was even more shocked. This little girl looked quite delicate, but why was her voice so terrifying? It was shocking enough for such a little girl to let out such a dragon-like roar. But that wasn't the only thing that shocked them. What was even more terrifying was that she had sung the national anthem with a childish voice that sounded like a death rock song. She simply suppressed the entire audience. Half of the spectator stand was emptied. Even the cameras turned to capture the 7- or 8-year-old girl jumping on the table. This was a live broadcast to all the people around the world who were watching the match. Rinpoche sat in the chair behind her and was brainwashed by the demonic music. He watched her jump on the table with a dark face. However, after thinking about it, he stopped his hand that was about to pull her back. This child has been cooped up in the palace for too long. Rinpoche knew why she was so excited as soon as she came out. Therefore, he didn't disturb her rare indulgence. Below the stage, the match began. Liu Shaoling from China versus Sonam from India. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 1019. As everyone knows, this year's Olympic Games is a special one. Since the emergence of martial arts more than 20 years ago, there have been a large number of martial artists who are far stronger than ordinary people. These martial artists have always been banned from participating in the Olympic Games. Over the years, many well-known athletes have suddenly disappeared from the field because of this reason, and some even abruptly withdrew from the competition. This year's Olympic Games has broken this restriction, and athletes who have reached the Xian level can also participate. Earth will officially call it the Man-Will level, but most of the time, it is called the Xian level. Heaven, Earth, Xian, and Huang are more in line with the habits of the people. The Xian level is equivalent to the Man-Will level. The Earth level is equivalent to the Earth-Will level, and the Heaven level is equivalent to the Spirit-Will level. Although the people on Earth know about this, they aren't very clear about the Sky Gate. This is because the Sky Gate involves the spirit and the spiritual body. It has always been classified as metaphysics, which is the weakness of the current scientific system. The two athletes on the field are both powerful Xian level. Everyone is familiar with Liu Shaoling, who has participated in the Olympic Games before. She broke through to the Xian level a few years ago, and according to the official information, she is at the intermediate level. Sonam is also an older athlete, but she is at the beginning level of the Xian level. She is slightly weaker than Liu Shaoling, and we don't know what kind of impact she will have in the competition. Now, let's see what kind of amazing game the two powerful athletes can bring us in this game, and how different it will be from previous games. As Rinpoche listened to the commentator's explanation, he folded his arms and looked at the stage with interest. Hua jumped onto the fence in front of him and balanced along the fence. He quickly jumped down, drank a big glass of juice, and went over to Run Wanyan's side to see what they were doing. The two athletes below had already started the competition. As soon as the game started, there was a burst of exclamations in the field, which attracted Hua's attention. The movements of the two people on the field were too fast. The speed of their feet, the speed of their racket, and the speed of the ball were all too fast. Those who were weaker couldn't even see the ball clearly. They could only see the two people moving quickly on both sides of the table tennis table, and every time they swung their racket, they could make a very clear and loud slap sound. Too fast, too fast. Both of them are too fast. I can't even see the ball. Now, I can only analyze their movements through the slow motion of the small screen. Soon, the score jumped to 2 o'clock. Liu Shaoling was in the lead, followed by Sonam. Looks like Liu Shaoling's movements are a little faster. From her expression, it can be seen that she's still at ease. Sonam, on the other hand, is having a hard time. There's already sweat on his forehead after just a few exchanges. Liu Shaoling has already gotten 4 points. Looks like Sonam is exhausted. Everyone could look at the ground under their feet. There was nothing unusual under Liu Shaoling's feet, but there was a row of footprints under Sonam's feet. It was the result of exerting too much force on the plastic floor. We can see that Sonam is doing her best. Nowadays, man-wheel experts weren't rare in China, and there were many man-wheel experts among the commoners. Some joined the government, while others continued their own lives, went to work, or engaged in other businesses. There was nothing wrong with saying that the experts were hidden among the people. Although there were currently only earth-wheel experts in the government, there were quite a number of man-wheel experts among the commoners. Fortunately, the country was prepared for these situations. Every man-wheel expert needed to be registered. The combat detection glasses from back then played a great role. Coupled with the country's Skynet system, even if these man-wheel experts committed crimes, they would be quickly arrested and wouldn't cause too much harm to society. As a result, even though the commoners were envious of man-wheel experts, they were relatively calm. Currently, there were even a few movie stars who were man-wheel experts. However, this was the first time that a man-wheel expert had participated in an Olympic competition. Although everyone knew that man-wheel experts were powerful, they were still shocked by the competition. With the strength of a man-wheel expert and professional training, the contestants in the competition displayed unimaginable strength, which was even more shocking from a visual point of view. Rinpoche's curiosity was satisfied, and he began to focus on other things. At this moment, someone knocked on the door of the private room. "Come in," Rinpoche said without turning his head. The person who came in was a sage-like man in a long robe and had a beard. He was about 50 years old. "Mr. Ren, you are—" Rinpoche looked back and didn't recognize this person. However, this person was actually an earth-wheel expert. One had to know that there were only a dozen earth-wheel experts in the country. "I'm Qing Daozi. Sorry to disturb you." Rinpoche thought about the other party's purpose for coming, pointed to the sofa next to him, and said, "Sit down and talk." Qing Daozi's expression suddenly changed, and he looked behind Rinpoche and said, "Be careful." Rinpoche's expression turned solemn as he stretched out his arm to grab Lu Hua's position, intending to pull her into his embrace and protect her. His heart raced. Was there an attack? Who was it? He didn't feel any killing intent. What kind of weapon was the other party using? However, before he could finish his thoughts, his outstretched arm caught nothing. "Mr. Ren, your daughter jumped down," Qing Daozi said anxiously. Rinpoche then realized that the other party's warning wasn't directed at him, but at Lu Hua. He suddenly got up and looked down, only to see a small figure leaping up from the crowd below. The target was the arena. This gave Rinpoche a headache. It was one thing for Lu Hua to cause trouble in the palace, but this was the Olympics. What was she going to do? At the thought of this, Rinpoche leaped up and tried to grab Lu Hua back. However, the arena wasn't big, and with Lu Hua's speed, she had already landed on the arena. Before anyone could react, she snatched the racket from Sonam's hand and backhanded the ball that Lu Shaoling had hit. No one could react to this sudden scene. It was too fast. From the moment she suddenly jumped into the arena, snatched the racket, sent Sonam flying, and backhanded the ball back, it all happened in an instant. The players in the arena were replaced. Instead of Sonam, she was replaced by a 1.3-meter-tall little girl with a ponytail and an exquisite face, dressed in an ancient costume. Even Sonam's opponent didn't retaliate and even hit the ball back. Lu Shaoling excitedly hit the ball back. Lu Shaoling hit the ball back again. Lu Hua hit the ball back. Rinpoche's face darkened while he was still in the air. However, Lu Hua didn't think too much about it. In her eyes, this was just a game. She felt that she was much better than that person. She should be the one playing. As for the arena and the fact that she couldn't play, this was beyond her understanding. She was a princess, and her past experience told her that she could do anything in the palace except demolishing it. After all, this was the thinking of a child without common sense. That was why such an unimaginable scene happened. Before Rinpoche landed, Lu Hua had already played 3 balls with Lu Shaoling and then hit the ball in her face with a racket. Lu Shaoling's head was raised backward. The petrified audience in front of the TV felt the pain. Then a bald, burly, and ferocious-looking man landed from the sky, grabbed the delicate girl, and dashed into the crowd, disappearing in the blink of an eye. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 10:20. What has happened? The commentator's exclamation rang out in the arena. Just now, a little girl jumped into the arena and snatched Sonam's racket. She played 3 rounds with Lu Shaoling before she was caught and taken away. Something unexpected happened on the table tennis field of the Olympic Games. Because of this unexpected incident, the game was temporarily interrupted. Even Lu Shaoling couldn't react in time and played 3 rounds with the opponent. At this point, the commentator's tone became a little strange. It was indeed unexpected for something like this to happen, but Lu Shaoling actually played 3 rounds with the opponent with a dumbfounded look. This was the main reason why he was speechless just now. In particular, Lu Shaoling was hit in the face by the opponent's last ball. Her nose was bleeding, and she was being helped off the stage by her teammates and coach to stop the bleeding. Let's look at the replay of the match. This little girl jumped over from the private room. She was very fast, too fast. If it weren't for the slow-motion camera, we wouldn't have been able to see her figure clearly. This is also the reason why the security forces in the arena couldn't react in time. It's hard to imagine that a little girl could be so fast. The signal wasn't cut off immediately, but the slow-motion camera was replayed instead. This also meant that China had changed in many aspects after becoming the world's most powerful country. In the past, the signal would have been cut off on the spot and replaced with advertisements. As the stadium and the TV cameras switched to the replay and slow motion, the stadium almost exploded. Everyone in front of the TV in the distance also came back to their senses. Their faces were filled with astonishment and shock, and they let out a series of exclamations. "Dad, it's you, Qing." Ren Xia, who was standing in the private room, was also astonished. He wasn't the only one. The other people in the private room were also astonished. No one expected the little girl in the private room to suddenly rush into the arena and play a few rounds with the player. Ren Xia and Ren Wanyin were even more astonished. That was the former's cousin and the latter's niece. After the replay was repeatedly replayed in slow motion, the commentator finally stopped repeating what happened in the arena and talked about another matter. Who was that little girl? How strong was she? Not only him, but everyone inside and outside the arena was also curious about this matter. The little girl's movements were really too fast. If the replay wasn't played in slow motion, it was almost impossible to see her figure clearly. Even a man-will expert couldn't match her speed. Above the profound level? But how old was she? Looking at her height and appearance, she seemed to be no more than 7 or 8 years old. The immaturity and childlike expression on her face also indicated that this girl was definitely not old. She might even be younger than she looked. Because a 7 or 8-year-old child already knew a lot of things, he shouldn't be able to do such a thing. Even if he was 7 or 8 years old, his strength above a mystic stage was enough to shock people. Also, who was that ball man just now? Also above the profound level? Shaoling, how are you feeling? The coach asked with concern. I'm fine. Lu Shaoling looked depressed. Not only was she depressed, but she was almost oppressed. After such a huge incident, he actually subconsciously swapped a few beats with the other party, and then he was hit in the face by a little girl. Everything that had just happened made her start to doubt her life. She had no doubt that what had happened tonight had made her a laughingstock. Ren Baqian gritted his teeth as he grabbed Lu Hua and left the arena. Royal father, why are you leaving? It's fun. Lu Hua was still a little nostalgic about the things he had just played and didn't realize how big of a mistake he had made. Ren Baqian took out the phone from his pocket, pressed it, and an old man appeared in the air. Was that your daughter just now? The old man on the screen was Yang Sun from the Messier 87 department. He was startled and smiled bitterly. In fact, he already knew who Ren Baqian was when he saw him. Sorry, the child isn't sensible. Ren Baqian's veins were bulging on his forehead. In the past, he hated it when parents said, the child isn't sensible. However, it was his turn to say this sentence now. This time, we've really made a big mess. It has already been broadcast to the whole world. What are you going to do? Yang's son smiled bitterly. Go home and beat the child. Do you want to see it? Rin Baqian gritted his teeth. Forget it. You don't show your face much anyway. This storm will subside after a while, Yang's son quickly said. Rin Baqian hung up the phone with a black face, and two old men appeared in the air. Was that Yuqing just now? Rin Baqian's parents were tongue-tied. You don't even recognize your granddaughter? We were shocked when we saw her on TV just now. Mama Ren asked worriedly. What should we do about such a big matter? Don't worry, it's a small matter. Rin Baqian tried to look relaxed. You don't have to worry. How can it be a small matter? Papa Rin raised his voice. Rin Baqian was right. In some ways, it was indeed a small matter. There was very little information about him in the outside world, and it didn't matter even if it was dug out. Would he care? Besides, she had only interrupted a competition. At the national level, this was indeed a very small matter. At most, such an accident would make some people look bad. To put it more seriously, it would damage the country's image. However, with her strength, anyone with a brain would be able to conclude that it was very difficult to stop her. Therefore, the damage to the country's image was just a simple sentence. Thinking about it this way, Rin Baqian felt that it was indeed a small matter. He had never taught Erhua, and she didn't know what the Olympics was. Could she be forgiven for committing such a crime? However, he still wanted to beat her up. After comforting his parents, Rin Baqian felt Erhua tugging at his clothes. Father, did I do something wrong? Erhua seemed to feel that something was wrong and looked up at Rin Baqian pitifully. What do you think? Rin Baqian's face darkened. I don't know. Erhua looked puzzled. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't sneak out or steal wine to drink at the thought of this. Erhua straightened her back and said solemnly, Father, I didn't do anything wrong. You can't beat me up. The Empress said that you will only be beaten if you make a mistake. Rin Baqian immediately laughed in his heart. With a cold face, he carried Erhua to the car and went straight to the hotel. On the way, he received a number of calls from the higher-ups of this year to Ning Kai-chun, Ren Wanyin, Ding Jia, Chun Qing. Many of them even comforted Rin Baqian. The higher-ups of this year's Olympic Games only mentioned what happened in the competition and praised Erhua's strength. However, all this couldn't change the fact that Erhua would be beaten up today. After much difficulty, they finally returned to the hotel. A moment later, a tragic chase took place in the hotel. Erhua's buttocks were swollen after Rin Baqian slapped him twice. Although Erhua was indeed very sturdy, Rin Baqian was also an earth wheel expert and had specially practiced the yang boosting technique, so his body was tyrannical. Next, Erhua began to run around the room while crying. He tore down half of the hotel floor. While Rin Baqian was tearing down the hotel and beating up the kid, the storm of the sudden incident in the competition was still brewing. The internet was almost exploding. Almost everyone was discussing what happened just now. Even those who didn't watch the competition went to watch the video and joined in the discussion. Among the three hottest topics, the first was the identity of the girl. The second was the strength of the girl. The third was the confession. This was actually the most popular topic. After all, Erhua's appearance was like that of the Empress. She was exquisite, beautiful, and had a bit of heroic spirit. Although she didn't have the icy temperament of the Empress, she gave people a weird feeling. Rin Baqian had unknowingly become the father-in-law of the nation. Baidu search 881 Chinese website. No advertising words that you're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.